I woke up face down in a cornfield in 1999, and before I could even enjoy the fresh air of 2 decades ago, I learned that my parents had already sold me. Not metaphorically, there was a price. 8,800 yuan, paid by the butcher's family one village over, in exchange for me marrying in as a live-in son-in-law. In rural China, that's not a wedding, that's a transfer of ownership. The groom moves into the bride's house, takes her family's name off the door, and spends the rest of his life being introduced as our daughter's husband, in the tone you'd use for our new refrigerator. And my father was walking toward me through the corn with his belt already off. The unfair part? Yesterday I was a 40-year-old construction boss in 2018, dying in a prison infirmary over a debt that wasn't even mine. Now I'm Guo Tianming, 18, the certified disgrace of Guo Village, a kid who spent 3 years running around with a knife and a bad haircut. My new body came with a reputation, and the reputation was, sell him while anyone's still buying. 8,800, my father shouted, closing in. The Wang family is being generous. You'll go, you'll behave, and you'll thank them. I did what any reasonable time traveler would do when facing his own father with a belt. I ran. I ran deeper into the cornfield, tripped over an irrigation ridge, and landed face first in front of the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen. A little wooden building, waist high, sitting between the corn rows like someone had dropped a model kit. It looked exactly like the town center from Age of Empires. I knew because in my past life I had spent roughly 400 hours of my youth in that game instead of studying, which my teachers said would never pay off. Ladies and gentlemen, my teachers were wrong. A panel opened in front of my eyes. Resources: food, wood, stone, iron. Population: 0 of 5. And one glowing button that said, in effect, feed me and I will give you workers. I fed it. I shoved in the dry corn from around me, watched the food counter tick up, and pressed the button. The town center door opened and out walked a man. Full-sized, flesh and blood, warm hands, honest face, dressed like every farmer uncle I'd ever met. His name floated over his head for only me to see. Worker 1. He looked at me the way an employee looks at a boss. Not a fantasy summon, not a ghost, a worker, with 2 skills listed under his name, agronomy and construction. I pointed at 3 mu of unharvested corn and said, cut it. He and his buddy cleared 3 mu in half an hour. 3 mu, half an hour. I stood there doing the math with my mouth open. In my past life, I ran crews of 200 men, and I'm telling you, I would have traded 50 of them for these 2. That was the moment the panic stopped and the planning started. Because here's the thing about me. Put a system in front of some men, and they see cheat codes. I saw labor costs. I saw a construction company with 0 payroll, 0 turnover, and workers who never once ask for a cigarette break. My father was still somewhere behind me, armed and motivated. I had 5 yuan in my pocket and a magic building that ate food and spat out the best construction crew in Asia. The year was 1999. The whole country was about to start pouring concrete for 20 years straight, and they'd sold me for 8,800. Fine, let's go find out what I'm actually worth. The system's rules revealed themselves fast, and every rule was better than the last. The town center didn't want money, it wanted food, and not even good food. I fed it our leftover grain, 2 retired hens, and a duck with a bad attitude, and it converted everything into neat little ration units, 110 portions. 10 portions summoned 1 worker, so the exchange rate of the universe was 1 uncooperative duck equals part of a man. I left a note for my parents. Gone to make money, don't sell me while I'm out, and went to audit my new body's assets. The diary under the mattress confirmed the worst. This body had spent 3 years as a village thug. It had, at one point, stabbed the local lunatic Guo Jianjun. It owed favors, held grudges, and was known to every shop owner in a 10-li radius the way a fox is known to chicken farmers. Which turned out to be useful, actually. The first time I walked into town, a red-haired teenager took one look at me and gave me his cigarettes. Just handed them over, preemptively, like a man paying taxes. Reputation is also an asset. It just appreciates funny. By the end of the week, I had 13 workers, and I'd learned the single most important economic fact of my new life. Pork. The system rated pork at the best conversion ratio of any food in the county. 1 yuan of pork became one full ration. Every other food was a scam by comparison. So my entire supply chain, the foundation of everything I would ever build, the bedrock of a future business empire, ran through one specific meat stall in Sancha Township, operated by one specific girl with a cleaver and forearms that could crack walnuts. I bought 100 jin of pork from her. She threw in extra bones and asked if I was opening a restaurant. Something like that, I said. 630 portions, 63 new workers. My crew hit 76 men overnight, and I housed them on the mountain where nobody goes, because explaining where 76 identical-looking farmer uncles came from was not a conversation I was ready to have. My cover story, when my father finally cornered me in an alley, was a masterpiece of vagueness. They're demobilized veterans, old army contacts. Very disciplined. My father looked at me for a long moment, decided that whatever I was doing was less embarrassing than what I usually did, and let it go. He even handed me back 3,000 yuan he'd collected settling my brick orders in the village. Then he pointed a finger at me and issued the one paternal command he considered non-negotiable. Stay away from Chen Meilin. Chen Meilin. According to the village, she was the woman my old body had been protecting, which in village language meant something scandalous. According to the actual facts, which I dug up later, my old body had been sneaking to her house at night to play Red Alert on her computer for 5 yuan an hour. That was it. That was the entire scandal. The village had constructed a whole forbidden romance out of a teenage boy's gaming addiction. I'd have laughed if the truth weren't somehow more embarrassing than the rumor. Meanwhile, I needed a first contract, and my fourth uncle needed a house. His son, my cousin Guo Haoyu, was getting married in December, and the family had no builder because every able hand in the village had gone to the cities. So I sat in his courtyard, drew him a floor plan on the back of a fertilizer bag, 2 living rooms, 4 bedrooms, 130 square meters, and quoted him 8,000 for the whole thing, done in a month. My uncle laughed at me. Not a mean laugh, the laugh you give a kid who says he's going to be an astronaut. 3 days later, I marched 76 men in matching camouflage through the middle of Guo village with flags and firecrackers, because if you've got the crew, you might as well have the parade. The village came out to stare. My uncle came out to stare. My uncle then watched this army walk up to his old house and take it apart like a roast chicken, roof, walls, foundation, gone before lunch, and the man fainted. Genuinely fainted. In his defense, he hadn't technically said yes yet. He woke up to a poured foundation and the best decision of his life already made for him. I should mention how I'd been feeding this operation in the meantime because 13 workers eat, and dignity was not on the menu. My third uncle, Yu Hongwei, ran a brick kiln perpetually short of hands, and the neighboring cement and sand yards were the same. So in the early days, I rented my crew out by the half day like a very muscular temp agency. 750 yuan for an afternoon of loading. And the yard bosses kept asking where I found men who never slowed down, never complained, and never once wandered off to squat behind the kiln with a cigarette. Family, I said. Very large family. Nobody pushed. In the countryside, an answer delivered with confidence is a document. My cousin Fan Jie ran the village shop, and his contribution to the enterprise was twofold: gossip and vehicles. The gossip filled in my body's history, who I owed, who feared me, which shopkeepers flinched when I entered. The vehicles came later and got out of hand fast, but at this stage, his shop was my war room, and his counter was where I registered a stack of gold QQ numbers, 6666, 8888, the pretty ones nobody in 1999 knew would be worth anything. Because a time traveler passing an unclaimed gold mine has a moral obligation to stop and dig. Fan Jie watched me spend real money on imaginary internet numbers and quietly told my mother I might need a doctor. After that, the phone didn't stop. Second uncle wanted a house. Seventh master wanted a floor added. Every aunt within marriage distance had a project. In 4 days, I earned 9,800 yuan, spent all of it on pork and tools, and understood that I had found the only business model I would ever need. Everyone in China wanted to build, and I was the only contractor alive whose workers were literally made of duck. Then the pork girl recognized me. I was buying my usual 100 jin when she put down the cleaver, squinted, and said my name in a tone that had history in it. And I looked at her properly for the first time, really looked, and my two lives collided in one horrible frame of recognition. Wang Ling, my first-grade classmate, the girl the whole class had called Fat May, Chubby Ling, the girl whose pigtails I personally, in this body, had yanked in elementary school, an offense for which she had beaten me up. Publicly. Thoroughly. And this was also the girl whose family had just paid 8,800 yuan for me. I was buying my company's entire food supply from my own bride price. She grinned at me the way a cat grins at a cornered mouse. "So," she said, tapping the cleaver on the counter, not threateningly, just keeping her hands busy, "when's the wedding?" Great question. Tremendous question. I gave her the extremely smooth answer of paying for my pork and leaving at a speed just under a run. But I kept coming back. Partly because the exchange rate demanded it. Mostly because, and I'll deny this if quoted, arguing with Wang Ling was the best part of my week. She read me like a delivery invoice. She knew when I was lying, which was often, and called it out with the calm of a woman who has weighed meat her whole life and cannot be cheated on quantity. One morning she read my face and said, "You're actually going to marry me, aren't you?" And I put her on the back of my bicycle instead of answering, and neither of us mentioned that I pedaled 2 li past her stall for no reason at all. The empire grew. 520 portions here, 1,050 there. My crew crossed 300. And with headcount came the first real test. Because in every county in China, the moment your business shows a pulse, a man like Brother Haoyu shows up to check it. Wen Haoyu. Local racketeer, shaved head, brown glasses, 4 minions, the whole starter kit. He'd been squeezing a tailor named Lei Jiming over an abandoned storefront, and Lei Jiming was on my client list now, and I have a policy about people squeezing my clients. I called Brother Haoyu out to the site. He came expecting a negotiation. What he found was himself, standing in a circle of 100 silent men in camouflage, who had all stopped working at the same instant, in the same posture, and turned to face him at the same time. Say what you will about system workers, their synchronization is deeply upsetting to watch. Brother Haoyu returned the 100,000 he'd taken. Then he returned 25,000 more that nobody had asked about, which I appreciated as a gesture. Then, because I believe in rehabilitation, I sentenced him and his 4 minions to carry bricks. Here's what nobody tells you about village gangsters. They make outstanding foremen. They're loud, they're organized, they already know how to get men moving, and once you redirect the menace towards schedule enforcement, it's honestly beautiful. Within a month, Brother Haoyu was running site logistics and had opinions about rebar. Within 2, he was Haoyu Ge, my director of projects, and if you'd tried to take that job from him, he'd have fought you in a way his old self would have been proud of. And Lei Jiming, the tailor we'd rescued, he brought his cousin, and the cousin ordered an entire garment factory. Then they turned around and ordered 1,000 work vests from us. My protection racket victim had become my client, my supplier, and my biggest fan, all in one fiscal quarter. Somewhere in those weeks, I also had my one honest breakdown, and I'll tell it straight because it earned its place. It was late, I'd been drinking with the contract crowd, and I walked out past the fields alone and just stopped. Stood there in the dark between 2 lives. In the last one, I'd worked 30 years, trusted the wrong partner, signed the wrong guarantee, and died in a prison bed while the man whose debt it was drove a new car. Nobody visited. And now here I was with a second chance. A magic building, a village that was learning my name for good reasons this time, and my throat closed up over all of it at once, and I stood in a cornfield crying like the 18-year-old whose face I was wearing. Chen Meilin found me like that. Of course she did, the village's most inconvenient woman, on the village's most inconvenient errand. She asked if I was all right. I said something rude, because a man caught crying will always choose rudeness, and she looked at me a moment longer than necessary and rode off without another word. She never told anyone. I noted that, filed it, and pretended for months that the night hadn't happened. It had, though. Everything I built after it was built by a man who knew exactly what the alternative timeline felt like. This is the part of the story where I should have slowed down and consolidated. Instead, the old village chief came to dinner and mentioned, between toasts, that a chemical plant wanted to buy the land around Green Lake. And my blood went cold, because I remembered this. In my past life, that plant had come, and it had poisoned everything, the lake, the fields, the wells. And the old village chief, the man pouring my father's wine right now, had died at the banquet celebrating its opening. Not this time. I put down my cup and started talking very fast about a mountain, Shaoqing Mountain, 2,000 mu of rock and scrub that nobody wanted, sitting right where the chemical plant would need its access road. I told the old village chief I'd take the mountain myself. Tourism development, I said, 30 local jobs, 5 tractors, 1,800 a year to the village. I invented most of it on the spot. The words 5-year plan left my mouth before my brain had approved them. What I did not anticipate was the township government's reaction, which was roughly the reaction of a starving man watching someone unwrap a sandwich. A development committee toured the mountain within days. I improvised harder, show houses, a scenic zone, a whole water margin theme because the region had history with the novel, and the officials started finishing my sentences with bigger numbers. By the end of the tour, the land was registered to me without my signature. A 200,000 yuan loan had been assigned to me the way homework is assigned, and the township head was shaking my hand with both of his. My father explained it to me that night, gently, as if to an idiot. You're the template. Every county needs one private business to point at. Congratulations, you're the point at. The chemical plant, meanwhile, had noticed that its land had grown a mountain-sized problem, and its boss, a gentleman named Bo Kong, decided to solve the problem the traditional way, hire local muscle to wreck my site. The muscle he tried to hire, and I want you to sit with this, was me. His people asked around for the scariest name in Sancha Township, and the scariest name in Sancha Township was still Guo Tianming, 3-year village menace. His assistant offered Guo Tianming 3,000 yuan to run my own competitors off my own mountain, without ever learning what I looked like. I took the money. Obviously, I took the money. I demanded cash, same night, up front, for professionalism, and then I went home and reported to myself that the job was done. Because technically, the only competitor on that mountain was me, and I had definitely been dealt with. Somewhere in an office, Bo Kong crossed an item off a list, satisfied. It stayed crossed off for weeks. I consider those 3,000 yuan the cleanest money I have ever earned. When he finally figured it out, subtlety ended. 20 hired thugs came up the mountain one afternoon with pipes and confidence. What they walked into was theater. See, system buildings obey me, including, it turns out, on the subject of when to fall down. So when the first thug swung at a wall, I had the wall collapse, dramatically. Workers fell, clutching injuries. From the thugs' point of view, they were suddenly, inexplicably, demolishing a village enterprise on camera, while the sword statue decorations by the gate stepped off their pedestals and closed the exits, which, from their point of view, must have raised several theological questions. And then, this part even I couldn't have scripted, the township leadership arrived mid-riot. Secretary Kong took a punch from a thug who didn't recognize him, which converted the incident from business dispute to assault on a government official in one swing. And Director Zhou of the county police, a bald veteran with the build of a wardrobe, personally chokeslammed the ringleader into next week. The chemical plant was finished after that. The investigation found the thugs, then the pollution permits, then everything else. The plant that had poisoned my whole valley in another life was dead before it broke ground in this one, and the old village chief, who would have died at its opening banquet, was instead standing on my mountain complaining that my workers marched too loudly. I gave the man a job doing quality inspections. He was thrilled. He'd been dying for something to yell at. Compensation from the case brought me 400,000 and a slightly used Jinbei van. My cousin Fan Jie became my driver. My mother hired village women to cook for the crew, and Wang Ling started delivering meat to my mother directly. In village terms, that is not commerce, that is courtship, and every auntie in 3 villages knew it before I did. And up on the mountain, my system did something new. I'd been feeding it objects, a tape measure, a pencil, machine parts, and it had been studying them, copying them. The blacksmith shop it built could repair real machinery. Real machinery. That was the day my ambitions stopped being measured in houses, because here's what a construction man dreams about at night. Equipment. Mixers, cranes, loaders, tampers, the steel that separates a crew from a company. And I knew exactly where equipment went to die. Dakong Village. An entire village that had gotten rich in the early 90s buying and stripping used machinery, now sitting on mountains of it. Seventh Master, the local antiques dealer, a man whose collection had suspiciously fresh dirt on it, walked me in and introduced me to Third Master, keeper of the scrap ledgers, and we started buying. Mixers, rollers, a crane with a personality disorder. The negotiation culture of Dakong deserves an anthropology grant. Seventh Master walked half a step behind me through the whole tour, making tiny signals against his trouser leg. 2 fingers, the seller is bluffing. A thumb rub, open at 200,000. A flat palm, walk away. A complete silent language, developed over decades of scrap dealing, taught to me in one afternoon on the principle that family shouldn't overpay. When I asked what I owed him for the education, he looked genuinely insulted and made the signal for walk away. Then, over lunch, Third Master mentioned he wanted a villa built and asked my price, and my brain did the thing it does. No cash, I said. Trade me machinery. The table went quiet. Third Master put down his cup. Say that again? You've got a yard full of iron and a wife who's been asking for a new house for 6 years. I've got a construction crew and no fleet. You give me the roller, the 2 mixers, and that crane with the bent boom. I give you 2 floors, a courtyard, and tile in the kitchen. Nobody touches their savings. You could hear the idea land, physically hear it, chopsticks stopping around the table. In a village drowning in used equipment, where every boss had iron rusting in his yard and a wife complaining about the house, I had just invented currency. Master Kang wanted in before dessert. 2 more bosses happened to drop by during tea. 5 villa contracts by dinner. Then the Dakang village chief himself, richest man in the region, a man whose signature alone had made careers, ordered one for straight cash, and because he was the kind of man who couldn't enjoy anything quietly, he walked to the village office and announced it over the loudspeaker. The loudspeaker. Attention villagers, I am building a villa. The builder is the young man at Third Master's table. That is all. Orders avalanched. 10 contracts, 3 million plus in value, a full million of it cash, the rest paid in the finest pre-owned construction fleet in the province. I tried to give Third Master and Seventh Master 10% for brokering it. They refused with genuine offense, which in that village was the highest compliment on record. The convoy home was deliberate. I routed every mixer, every crane, every flatbed straight through the middle of the township at noon, free advertising at diesel prices, and parked the fleet on my mountain, where the blacksmith shop got to work and the military camp I'd unlocked started producing swordsmen in tin armor who stood very still and made excellent statues until needed. The system, meanwhile, kept quietly revealing that it was not what I'd assumed. I'd thought I was renting labor. What I actually had was a technology tree. The first hint was the blacksmith shop, a wooden building with a forge staffed by system smiths that I'd built expecting horseshoes and which turned out to be able to repair a hydraulic excavator arm. Not approximately, correctly, to tolerance, in a day, for the cost of ore. Every rusted machine I'd bought by the ton from Dakang went in broken and came out working. That single building was worth more than my entire equipment budget, and it's the reason I could buy scrap at scrap prices and field a modern fleet. The second hint was worse, or better. I fed the system a tape measure to see what would happen, and the panel began analyzing it. Then a pencil, then a length of rebar, a bag of cement, a diesel engine. Each time, the system studied the object, decomposed it, and updated what my people knew how to make. Cement cut construction timelines. Rebar cut them again. The steam engine unlocked better hoisting equipment. I was not summoning a medieval village. I was running an industrial research program with a very literal-minded librarian, and every real-world technology I showed it made my ancient workers a little more modern, which is how a rural construction company ended up with structural steel capabilities that provincial state enterprises couldn't match. Not magic, just an entity that had never heard of a patent, looking at a good idea and saying, noted. The third hint arrived when I fed it gold. My mother's gold necklace, then bullion I bought from Seventh Master, and the panel unlocked a town center upgrade, level 2, with drafting rooms, a market, stone walls, and farm wives. Actual wives, for the farmers, who promptly got married in what I can only describe as an automated mass wedding. My chief foreman, Lei Wang, came to me one morning to formally announce his marriage, glowing with pride, to a woman who had existed for 4 hours. I gave him 3 days off and a red envelope, and did not ask a single question, because some management situations do not improve under examination. And Dakang itself got the biggest contract of all, because I looked at that village, mountains of machinery, workshops in every courtyard, the whole place one organizational chart away from being an industrial park, and pitched the village chief on becoming exactly that. Dakang New Village, a machinery company, a trade market, new housing, 18 million yuan of construction. The chief's nephew had quoted 23 million for the same scope. I quoted my honest 18 and walked him through why, line by line, and the old man stared at me for a long moment and said, "You're either the most honest builder in Dongshan or the most patient crook." "Both," I told him. He announced it over the loudspeaker, naturally, and wired 10 million in advance. And Hao Yu-ge, who had personally watched me argue a client down 3 days earlier, took a photograph of himself standing in front of the showroom and got a bit misty about it. The man had discovered that legitimate business could be more exciting than crime, a lesson I was apparently teaching the whole county, one gangster at a time. The village repaid me with a lesson of its own. Da Kang had 5 resident con men, the 5 dragonheads, local millionaires whose fortunes were built on swindles. And I watched the village elders convene in a root cellar, decide with total calm to let the 5 keep fattening themselves until harvest, and then hand the whole file to the police in one bundle. 1.37 million recovered. The village called it feeding the pig for New Year's. I called it the most patient enforcement action I'd ever seen, and made a note never to be a pig in Da Kang. Life was good. Business was thriving. My biggest daily problem was that Big Toe, the village simpleton, had been standing guard outside Chen Meilin's door for a week because I'd once paid him in roast chicken to do it and had forgotten to ever tell him to stop. She'd been under polite siege for 7 days. When she finally got word to me, I did the responsible thing, recruited her to run my call center, where her talent for saying exactly what she thought at maximum volume turned out to be a management skill. And then a real competitor showed up, and I got to find out what this era's business warfare actually looked like. Shangpin Construction out of Liang County. A real company, licenses, engineers, an actual boss named Ma Chang with an actual office. They rolled into my territory with the classic playbook, undercut prices, then spread the word that Tiancheng was a shoddy outfit run by a village gangster, which, to be fair, was only half wrong, and the wrong half was shoddy. I did not respond with a price war. Price wars are for people whose workers eat money. I responded by lending Shangpin 50 of my best men, not officially. Officially, 50 experienced construction workers showed up at Shangpin's sites looking for jobs, led by a system farmer wearing the name Ma Fu Gui, and Shangpin's manager Ma hired them on the spot because good hands were scarce, and these 50 were visibly the best hands he'd ever seen, which they were. That was the trap. Because my 50 model employees worked exactly as instructed, and I mean exactly. Shangpin's foremen, squeezed by their own underbidding, started calling shortcuts, stretch the mortar, hollow the infill courses, thin the columns nobody inspects. A normal worker fudges a shortcut, hedges it, leaves it half done out of shame. My men executed each corrupt instruction with the crisp, total, cheerful obedience of soldiers, to specification, on schedule, while Ma Fugui kept a beautiful log of who ordered what and when. Then I arranged for a quality commission to inspect both companies on the same day, in public, with a crowd. I may also have arranged the crowd. They opened Shangpin's demonstration wall first. The hammer went in on the second swing, and the wall opened like a fortune cookie, hollow, honeycombed, mortar you could crumble with a thumb. The crowd made the sound crowds make. Manager Ma made a different sound. Then the commission crossed the road to my wall, swung, bounced, swung harder, bounced harder, called for a drill, and hit grade 425 cement all the way through, at which point the lead inspector, a dry old man who had condemned half the buildings in the county, patted my wall twice, almost apologetically, like it was a good horse. Manager Ma stood in front of the cameras, assembling and disassembling the only true sentence available to him. My competitors' workers were too obedient to my own corrupt instructions. A grown man cannot say that to a commission. He knew it. And watching him not say it, watching it die physically behind his teeth while the crowd waited, was the best entertainment that county had all year. He later tried to recruit informants inside my company. The informant he successfully recruited was Ma Fugui. My spy became his spy while remaining my spy. And for one glorious quarter, I was effectively writing Shangpin's intelligence reports about myself. I kept them accurate, but discouraging. Shangpin retreated from the township with its reputation in a wheelbarrow. Round 1 to the duck-powered company. The chemical plant, it turned out, had one more card, and it was uglier than thugs. Bo Kong had a brother, Bo Hao Yu, a genuine criminal operating out of the south, the kind with real weapons and real bodies behind him, and after the plant died, Bo Hao Yu came north for me, personally. His crew jumped my car on a rural road at dusk, 8 men, and I did the thing that made my bodyguards start believing in me religiously. I drove into the nearest village. By the time the pursuers arrived, there was a town center standing in a courtyard that had been empty 90 seconds earlier, and the night was full of polite men with swords. All 8 captured, not a scratch on my side. The disposal was my favorite part. Executing enemies is for dramas. I run a labor-intensive business. I sentenced all 8 to the quarry. The execution is tomorrow, might as well work today, and then never scheduled the execution, just more quarrying. Within a month, the youngest one, a kid called Little Pung, was voluntarily hitting productivity targets and asking about advancement tracks. Bo Hao Yu himself went down soon after, with everything else the investigation shook loose, and his confiscated dirty money, 20 million of it, I steered into a donation program building Hope primary schools across the poor townships. Blood money into blackboards. Some accounting cleanses itself. That whole affair scared my old village chief enough that he demanded I organize proper security, so I did. Tianwei Security Company, staffed by systems swordsmen in suits, and run by Lei Qiming, a farmer whose interrogation talents I discovered by accident and decided to formalize before he freelanced. Give your most alarming employee a title and a process. It's cheaper than the alternative. But I want to be fair to Ma Chang, my nemesis in chief, because this man would be in my life for a long time, and he deserves an honest introduction. He was not stupid. He was a genuinely competent builder with a real organization who had made one strategic error, which was existing near me. Everything that happened to him afterward, and a lot was going to happen to him, he took with the resilience of a cockroach in a suit. I've had partners I respected less. Around this time, I also launched the program I'm proudest of, and it barely made money at all. I called it National Construction internally, with no irony. 3-room houses for 15,000 yuan, payable by working it off on my crews, plus free roads to any village that ordered in bulk. The county's poor families had been watching prosperity happen to other people for 20 years. I priced them into it and let them pay with the one asset they had, their hands. 51 families from Guo village alone signed up, and in a maneuver I do regret enjoying this much, I filed those 51 applications through Shangpin's own promotional offer of free construction, materials provided, during their price war, so that my competitor spent a furious month building free houses for my home village before anyone senior read the paperwork. The Hope Primary School program brought me Gao Jian, and Gao Jian deserves his paragraph. The county rumor mill had him pegged as a Hong Kong tycoon quietly scouting investments. The truth, a retired master chef who had donated his entire life savings to a village school and was living on nothing, too proud to say so. In my previous life, this man died slandered, accused of the exact fraud he'd beggared himself to prevent. In this one, I took over the school project he'd funded, built it properly, and hired him as head chef at 50,000 a year, an offer he accepted only after tasting my cooking, declaring it a crime against ingredients, and taking the job in what he described as self-defense on behalf of my workers' stomachs. Somewhere in that same stretch, I also gained a dog, a village idiot, and a football league. And I'd like to introduce the first two properly because they became institutions. Buddy was a yelling mongrel with a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead who attached himself to my crew and then to me, in that order, and who developed over the following years into the single most effective piece of security equipment I owned. He could find anything. He could find people who did not want to be found. My intelligence department eventually started requisitioning him for field work, and one of my managers later blew an entire manhunt in Huanggang and only realized his mistake when someone asked why he hadn't brought the dog. Big Toe was the village's simple-minded giant, a man built like a grain silo with the disposition of a very large child, who the whole county had spent 20 years talking around rather than 2. I gave him a job, guard duty, mostly ceremonial, paid partly in roast chicken, and the results were both excellent and occasionally catastrophic, as previously documented in the Chen Meilin siege incident. Later, he ran the mountain patrols with a team of his own. When outsiders asked why I employed him, I said he was reliable, which was true, and left out the part where a man who has been laughed at for 2 decades will guard the first place that gave him a title with a devotion no salary can purchase. The football came from the old village chief, who watched my crews work 14-hour days and told me flatly that men need rest, and rest needs a reason. So I built the Sancha Cup. Village teams, township teams, real prizes, tricycles, motorcycles, appliances, and a stadium made of scaffolding. A woman from my customer service department commentated in a full American basketball broadcast voice she learned from a bootleg tape and it was the funniest and best thing anyone in that county had ever heard. There was one structural problem. Some of my worker teams were system men whose skill file included kuju, the ancient Chinese ball game, which turns out to translate to football with disgusting efficiency. My Dragon Tiger team won the final 2-0 against the county's best without the opposition touching the ball once. Not barely touching, 0 contact. It stopped being a match and became a demonstration, and I sat in the stands watching thousands of farmers howl with laughter and understood that I'd accidentally invented sports entertainment. It also taught me the model I'd use later at 10 times the scale. Don't charge the teams, charge the advertisers. Every business in my chamber sponsors a squad. Every township sponsors a squad. The television station pays for broadcast rights, and the whole thing becomes a 2-week commercial for everyone involved that people watch voluntarily. Big Two and Buddy set up an unauthorized toll booth on the footpath to the stands and collected candy from children for 3 days before I shut down their enterprise. And honestly, of everyone involved, they understood the business model fastest. And I recruited a duck king. Han Chang, vice president of Shangpin Construction, my enemy's own deputy, was a man I remembered from my past life as the founder of a roast duck chain that eventually stretched across half of China. So I took him to dinner, and over donkey meat I described in loving detail a business idea I'd been toying with. Marinated duck, chain stores, a brand, his own secret dream, which I was reciting back to him like a fortune teller. The man nearly wept into his cup. He resigned from Shangpin within the month to found Chin Black Duck with my backing, which meant that in one dinner I had gutted my competitor's management and secured a lifetime supply of the county's best duck necks. Ma Qiang later called this the dirtiest thing I ever did to him. Not the pig farm, not the inspections, losing old Han. Round 2 was already loading. But first, I had a wedding to not have. Here's the thing about being technically sold to your pork supplier's family. The paperwork doesn't expire just because you got rich. My mother, armed with a broom and 20 years of unspent matchmaking energy, raised the subject at dinner with the subtlety of a demolition crew. The Wang family had paid. The village had opinions. Wang Lingling was, and I quote my own mother, strong enough to carry you out of a burning building, which with your lifestyle you will need. So I did what I do. I restructured the deal. Wang the butcher's real problem wasn't marrying off his daughter. It was that he had no son, no heir, nobody to carry the family line, which is why he'd wanted a live-in son-in-law in the first place. So I sat down with the man, drank Mao Tai with him straight from the bottle, and pitched him a merger instead. I'd find him a wife. He was a widower with a good business and all his own teeth. The widow Feng from the East End was practical, kind, and an excellent cook. Let the man make his own heir and release my marriage from its hostage situation. Not cancelled, mind you. Renegotiated. Voluntary terms. Market rate. He cried into the Mao Tai and called me a son, which, I pointed out, was exactly the outcome he'd originally paid for, minus the paperwork. The pigtail I could pull for free now was, in Wang Lingling's words, a rounding error on 8,800 yuan, and if you think she let me forget the original price tag, you have not been paying attention to her character. I should tell you what Wang Lingling is actually like, because butcher's daughter with a cleaver undersells the woman criminally. I once asked Fan Jie to buy her a gift on my behalf. Something nice, I said, something a girl would like, and Fan Jie, interpreting freely, presented her with a Model F4 fighter jet and a model tank. I arrived braced for cleaver weather. She was assembling the tank. She had opinions about the tank's historical accuracy. It emerged that this girl had grown up on military magazines, could identify aircraft by silhouette, and had dreamed her whole childhood of being a female special forces operator, Chief Black Cat, she said, with the exact face other girls used for wedding dresses. I had accidentally given the perfect gift through pure delegation failure. I have never admitted this to her, and I am admitting it to you now, only because she doesn't listen to my recaps. Dinner with her father was its own military exercise. Wang the butcher poured me a drink, looked me over like a carcass he was pricing, and issued exactly one condition for his blessing, delivered with terrifying sincerity. No children before the wedding. I choked on Mao Tai. Wang Lingling turned the color of her own pork. The old man nodded once, satisfied that the message had landed, and went back to his drink. And that was the entire conversation. The shortest, most effective compliance briefing of my career. The actual moment, the one I'd get grilled about at every family dinner for the rest of my life, happened on a tractor. I was testing a rebuilt one from Da Kong. She climbed on the fender uninvited, and I announced, loudly, to the whole site, Whoever rides the tractor with me, that's who I marry. It was supposed to be a joke. Nobody got off. Neither did I. The site applauded. My foreman honked a crane horn. That's the whole romantic story, and I'm sticking to it. I proposed via agricultural equipment, and she accepted by refusing to move. Meanwhile, the war economy escalated because gold, actual gold, jewelry grade, turned out to trigger something in the system. Feeding it precious metal unlocked the town center's next level, and the next level came with farm wives for my farmers, a drafting room, a market, stone walls. My workers were getting married, to each other. The system was running a matchmaking program more efficient than my mother's, and by that point, I just accepted it and catered. Growth ate cash faster than I could earn it, and word got around that Tiancheng was overextended, so naturally, my enemies fanned the rumor. The boss has run off, the company's broke. And here I learned my favorite trick in all of business, one I'd reuse for years. Never fight a rumor. Feed it until it explodes. Broke? I told anyone who asked, mournfully. Worse than broke. It's not 10 million in debt, it's 50. Might be 60 by Friday. Honestly, nobody knows. And then I sat back and watched the rumor collapse under its own weight, because a lie only survives at plausible size. Nobody believed 50 million. People went to check and found billboards, cranes swinging, 300 men pouring foundations in formation, and a newspaper piece about Tiancheng planning 100 million yuan development. The rumor died of embarrassment. But the part I didn't script, the part I still think about, my phone started ringing. Da Kong's village chief offering 5 million, no questions. Lei Zhiming the tailor offering his savings, 100,000, apologizing it wasn't more. Wang the butcher, my almost father-in-law, offering 1 million he definitely didn't have liquid, growling, family doesn't watch, family drown. The township office scraped up 50,000. One by one, everyone I'd built for, everyone I'd defended, everyone I'd dragged into prosperity, called to hand me their wallets on the strength of a rumor that I was sinking. I sat in my office over the meat stall street with the phone against my ear and had a moment I'm not going to make a joke about. In my last life, I died alone in a prison bed over someone else's debt, and no phone rang at all. Then I cleared my throat, told everyone the money wasn't needed, and got back to work, because sentiment doesn't pour concrete. 2 footnotes from that period, both involving my brother, both of which the village still tells. Wo Junwei came home from wherever he'd been. He walked into the family courtyard, saw a company headquarters where the vegetable patch used to be, saw his disgrace of a younger brother giving orders to men in uniform, and went very quiet in the doorway. Then, during a renovation, my crew opened a wall cavity in the old house and found a hidden tin box. Inside, every love letter and greeting card my brother had ever written and never delivered, going back years. The workers cheerfully brought them to me. I cheerfully read them aloud. And Wang Lingling, visiting, unfortunately, assumed for one glorious minute that they were mine. I have been beaten many times in this story. That one I earned. And the jeeps. During the worst of the local turf trouble, 5 vehicles were stolen from a partner's lot, and my security company recovered all 5 within a day, which was excellent work. They returned them somewhat lighter than they'd left, having been thoroughly disassembled during the investigation, engines out, seats out, doors in a pile, and presented the parts to the owner with genuine pride at a job well done. I paid for the reassembly. I also stopped asking my security company for details, permanently, which improved everyone's quality of life. Concrete needed a flagship, and I had one drawn in my head for 20 years. Star Moon Bay. A crescent-shaped residential district for Xiang County, real apartments, real plumbing, real property management, the kind of place this county wasn't supposed to see for another decade. I picked 50 Mu in the East District because I remembered which direction this county grew, the way you remember the answers to a test you've already taken. Director Chen at the county land office gave me a progress contract, build first, pay from sales, because by then the government had decided I was less a businessman and more a weather event that produced tax revenue. Getting there meant clearing out the local food chain first. Xiang County had 4 gate bosses, 4 mid-tier tough guys who each ran a city gate's worth of turf, plus a Dongguan import named Wang Chang, a gangster contractor with a karaoke bar and ambitions. Wang Chang invited me to a midnight meeting at a gravel lot, which in his industry means a beating with witnesses. So I invited people too. I told the county leadership I'd been thinking about their late-night working habits and wanted to host something informal, An outdoor barbecue, very rustic, very local flavor, midnight, at a gravel lot on the edge of town that had excellent air. Secretaries, department directors, the police chief, the whole apparatus. In a county where the boss of the fastest growing enterprise invites you to eat lamb skewers under the stars, you go, and you don't interrogate the venue. By 11:50, I had 40 officials, 3 folding tables, 2 grills, a case of beer, and Director Joe, the bald veteran police chief with the build of a wardrobe, holding a skewer in each hand. At midnight, Wang Qiang arrived with a convoy and 30 men carrying implements. I have replayed his face many times. You come to a deserted lot expecting one arrogant young builder and a handful of bodyguards, and you find it lit up like a village festival, filled with the entire administration of the county you operate in, everyone turning to look at you and your 30 armed friends, and the police chief chewing. He tried. He genuinely tried, some noise about being in the neighborhood, while behind him his men reversed out of the light like a tide going out. 2 of my swordsmen had already collected the pair he'd sent ahead to scout, quietly, without breaking anything that wouldn't heal. Director Joe put down his skewer. The police found so much in Wang Qiang's house afterward that his sentencing read like a career retrospective. His bar? I bought it. The women he'd been holding on to with debts and threats. I cleared the debts and offered real jobs, kitchen, cleaning, site canteen, honest wages. Half took the offer. The other half took the freedom. Either way, his whole rotten little kingdom got recycled into payroll. The 4 gate bosses got gentler treatment, though gentle is doing some work in that sentence. Xiang County's east, west, south, and north gates each had a boss who took a cut of every load of sand and every bricklaying subcontract in his quarter. 4 men, 40 years of accumulated local power, and no reason on earth to make room for me. So I invited all 4 to dinner in a private room, sat at the head of the table, and put Gao Jie and Gao Wei behind my chair in suits. Neither of them said a word all evening. At one point, Gao Jie, apparently bored, took a pair of wooden chopsticks and pushed them into the door frame up to the middle, the way you'd push a knife into cake, and then stood back at attention. Nobody commented. The conversation continued. 4 experienced men spent the rest of that dinner talking to me while trying not to look at the doorframe. I offered them subcontracts on Zone D, masonry, concrete, rebar, plumbing, at honest rates, with my volume behind them, because I did not actually want 4 enemies, I wanted 4 suppliers with existing crews. All 4 signed. And then, entirely on their own initiative, having discovered that legitimate money was better money, they marched on Shangpin Construction over years of unpaid subcontractor debts with white banners reading, "Return our blood money," and camped outside the sales office for 3 days, which caused the bank inspecting Shangpin's collateral to reconsider the entire loan. I did not organize that. I want that clearly on the record. I simply built a situation where it became the most attractive option available to 4 angry men, and then I went to lunch. The Crescent Landmark sales office went up, a half-moon of glass and steel that had no architectural business existing in a county town in 1999, which was the point. People drove in from 2 counties over just to look at it. I hired school teachers as weekend consultants because parents trust teachers, put a professor from the civil engineering college on stage to explain load-bearing walls to farmers, and priced apartments at $600 a square meter. Staffing the Crescent produced a scandal I only learned about a year later. I'd invited 4 teachers from the county's #1 middle school, physics, chemistry, math, geography, to moonlight as consultants during the build, partly for the credibility, partly because my thousands of workers were all enrolled in self-study degree programs and needed tutoring at scale. The teachers came, saw what I paid, saw the working conditions, and quietly resigned from the school. All 4. I discovered this when my old homeroom teacher cornered me and informed me, with the specific joy of an educator holding a grudge, that I had personally hollowed out his faculty lounge. In my defense, I offered market rate, and the market spoke. I also picked up a director. Xu Haoyu sold pirated discs outside the internet cafe, which meant he had watched more film than any graduate of any academy, and when I caught him explaining shot composition to a customer who just wanted the disc, I hired him on the spot for the media unit I hadn't founded yet. This is my actual hiring philosophy for the record. Catch people doing the thing nobody's paying them for. That's the thing they'll be great at. Pre-sale day 1, 46.7 million yuan. Two things happened around that pre-sale that I have to include because my family has never let me forget either. The first, the 50 million yuan loan I'd fought the bank for finally landed, 4 days after I no longer needed it, having just taken 46 million in pre-sales. So I did what any responsible executive does with 50 million yuan of unexpected liquidity and dumped it into Shaoqing Mountain, which is why that mountain got its hospital, its hotel, and its harbor. Every good thing on that mountain exists because a bank was slow. The second, my little sister Xia Hua turned me into the police. She'd been away at school through most of my transformation. She came home and found her deadbeat brother in a suit, getting out of an imported car, surrounded by men in matching camouflage, calling himself the chairman of something. Then she drew the only sane conclusion available to a sensible teenage girl in 1999. Her brother had joined a pyramid scheme, or was running one, and had possibly murdered the real Guo Tianming somewhere along the way. So she reported me, formally, to Director Zhou, who, and this is the part that ended me, took the report seriously enough to send someone because his professional position was that with me, you check. I gave the team 77,000 in bonuses and stood on the crescent roof watching the queue wrap the block, and Ma Chang called me that evening, we had each other's numbers by then, the way boxers know each other's managers, and bet me his company could outsell mine. Loser sings Conquest in public. I wanted on the record that this man later performed a full rap number at his own opening event, self-written under the stage name Big Pimp DJ Ma Chang, to compete with my marketing. The recording circulated for months. There are wars you win on price, and there are wars you win because your enemy destroys himself culturally. Also, and I mention this purely as an operational note, when Ma Chang opened his rival development in Xiang County's West District, I happened to build a pig farm and a duck farm just upwind of it. Prevailing winds are public information. Site selection is a science. His sales office smelled like a barnyard on open day, and his customers toured apartments holding their noses, and if he'd studied meteorology instead of slander, none of that would have happened. By now, the county couldn't ignore my scale, so the bank came to inspect me for a real loan. The committee walked through my drafting office, computers, blueprints, professors on retainer, 18 million in equipment in the yard, and approved 30 million at 3.9%. And I'd like to thank the rumor mongers, because nothing makes a bank comfortable like a company that survived its own bankruptcy rumors with billboards up. And then the county's football fever paid off in a way nobody saw coming. The football thing started as crowd control, honestly. The old village chief told me my men worked too much and the townspeople gawked too much. So I organized the Sancha Cup, village teams, real prizes, tricycles, and motorcycles for winners. Except my worker teams had a small, unfair advantage, namely that some of them were Kuju-trained system men who played football like it owed them money. The final ended 2-0, with the losing team never touching the ball. A stray fair was born around the stadium. A woman commentator called matches in a full NBA voice. My dog Buddy and Big Two the Simpleton set up an unauthorized road toll on the path to the stands and collected candy until I confiscated the operation. The point is, the province noticed the crowds, and G City noticed me. The invitation to G City looked like a courtesy. Young rural entrepreneur, come present your development ideas. I walked in with a 1 billion yuan vision deck about dragging the city eastward along the canal, mostly to look ambitious. What I didn't know was that the big boss of the city had already inspected Shaoqing Mountain incognito, liked what he saw, and had a trap laid out on the conference table with my name on it. The trap was a stadium. The provincial games were coming to G City in October 2002. The city needed a sports center, 30,000 seats, a swimming hall, an indoor arena, the full complex, and every state contractor who'd looked at it had quoted 1 billion yuan and a timeline that quietly assumed the games might be postponed. Nobody wanted it. A public stadium is a prestige project for the city and a debt sentence for the builder. You finish it, you hand it over, you spend the next decade watching it lose money for somebody else. So the city's plan was simple. Flatter the rural boy, dangle some land, and see whether the strange company with the terrifying work speed and no institutional memory of how these things usually end would bite. They let me do my presentation first, which was generous of them, and I gave it everything. The canal corridor, the eastward expansion, 1 billion yuan of vision with the confidence of a man who owned about 8% of it. The leaders nodded along politely. Then the big boss set down his teacup and asked, conversationally, what I thought of the sports center budget. And I made the mistake that has defined my entire career. I answered honestly. The earthwork's fat, I said. You're quoting bulk excavation at market rate for a site that's mostly fill. You'll be paying to remove soil you should be reusing on the embankment 40 meters away. The steel tonnage assumes solid trusses where you want pipe trusses. That's 15% right there. And your schedule has the foundation piles finishing in the wet season, which means you'll pay for the same month twice. The room got quiet in a specific way. Somebody's pen stopped. I should have stopped. I did not stop. I kept going for 20 minutes. Out loud, from memory, restructuring their billion yuan project into a 700 million yuan one with a schedule that hit October 2002 with 5 months of margin. Because in my last life, I built stadium foundations for men who took the credit. I had spent 30 years wanting to say all of that to somebody with the authority to act on it. When I finally shut up, the big boss was smiling the way a fisherman smiles when the float goes under. 300 million from the city up front, he said. 600 more in stages. You cover the rest, you build it, you get 30 years of operating rights. And the land along the canal for your residential development. Call it a supporting facility at a supporting facility's price. 1,600 mu. Below market. Attached to a project I had just personally proven was profitable, in front of witnesses, using their own numbers. I want to be very clear about what happened in that room. I walked in to sell them a dream and walked out having been sold the biggest public works contract in the city's history by a man who had let me talk myself into it. I still maintain I was ambushed. The city still maintains I ambushed them. The truth is, we ambushed each other simultaneously, and both sides walked out delighted. And that, not banquets, not envelopes, is what good government relations actually look like. Two parties conning each other into the same correct outcome. Director Chen, my old land contact from Wuxiang County, had been promoted into G City by then and sat through the whole thing with the expression of a man watching his own investment appreciate. On the way out, he took my elbow and said quietly, "You know they've been trying to give that stadium away for a year." I know. Then why? Because in 2002, that stadium would be on provincial television for 2 weeks straight with my company's name on it. Because 30 years of operating rights on the only major venue in a city of millions is not a debt, it's an annuity. Because 1,600 mu of canal land earns back the construction cost before the roof goes on. But mostly because I'd spent one whole lifetime building other men's landmarks. Because I want to see it finished, I said, which was also true. The land that came attached, dirt cheap parcels by the canal for a second Star Moon Bay, would fund the whole thing. That's the move, by the way, the one I'd repeat forever. Take the public project everyone fears, make it profitable through the land around it, and let the city praise you for what your balance sheet was going to do anyway. Ma Chang, meanwhile, had found a new dance partner, Da Tai Construction, 2 old Fox brothers out of Tai City, and together they cooked up a scheme to dump an overpriced land parcel on me at the Liang County auction. The plan had layers. The plan had contingencies. The plan ended with Ma Chang outmaneuvering his own allies so thoroughly that Da Tai bought the parcel themselves. 40 million, the exact rock they'd meant to tie to my ankle. Then he tried to lock the auction hall doors on me for a renegotiation. Except my workers had already relieved his muscle of their posts an hour earlier. The only people locked inside that building were his. The 2 Da Tai grandfathers I handled separately, with what I still consider proportionate theater. My men escorted the old foxes to the lakeside, where I explained, regretfully, that people who scheme against me tend to have accidents near water, and then had them gently lowered toward the shallows, exactly long enough for both men to loudly rediscover their principles, before pulling them up dry and serving tea. Nobody touched the water. Nobody was going to. But for the rest of our acquaintance, whenever negotiations stalled, one of them would glance toward the nearest body of water and suddenly find my terms reasonable. I also collected the back wages of 35 specialists Ma Chang had poached and stiffed, and hired all 35 because my enemies kept training and delivering personnel to me like a courier service with extra steps. Then he escalated and hired an out-of-town enforcer called Black Tiger to ambush my convoy. Black Tiger drove out to the ambush point. He found the road lined with my excavators and several hundred men in camouflage doing synchronized embankment work. He performed some rapid career math. and he ordered his entire gang into the ditch to pull weeds, pretending to be road maintenance, until my convoy had gone past. I heard about it afterward from 3 separate witnesses. To this day, it's the only ambush I've ever been proud to receive. 40 gangsters, weeding, in formation, terrified, as I drove by without ever knowing they existed. I celebrated the quarter in Dakong village, where I'd just bought into shipyards because the system had unlocked boats. Actual boats. Fishing hulls, transport barges, and arrow-slit war junks straight out of a period drama, buildable at a dockyard, seaworthy on East Lake. I stood on that shore at sunset with Dakong's village chief, both of us holding cups, and told him that one day I'd film the Battle of Red Cliffs right here with a real fleet and real fire and no models. He toasted to it the way you toast a young man's nonsense. Neither of us knew I was underselling. Inside 2 years, that lake had a functioning ancient harbor, a war fleet, a sluice system, and a film base, and my director was shooting naval battles with actual ships crewed by actual soldiers, at a cost that made Beijing production houses phone up asking whether our budget numbers had a typo. They did not have a typo. That's the thing about this whole story that I still can't fully explain to people who ask how it happened. I never had a secret. I had a supply chain nobody could replicate, and I said yes to things. That winter, though, the yes to things habit finally found something bigger than me. The next year opened with G-City building sites in every direction, and my problems finally reaching city scale, which meant my enemies did too. Let me walk you through what I actually built that year, because the list is the story. Star Moon Bay G-City. 4 residential zones going up along the canal. On land, the stadium deal had thrown in cheap, which meant the biggest public project in the city's history was being funded by the apartments I built beside it. That's the whole trick, and I'll say it plainly. Take the terrifying public project nobody wants, price it honestly, and let the land around it pay you. The city gets a stadium 2 years early. I get 4 communities on discounted dirt. Everyone congratulates everyone. The bus company, which started as a complaint, G-City ran 27 imported buses, each costing over $1,000,000 yuan, bleeding $1 million a year in losses, on a system where you boarded first and bought your ticket after, which sounds minor until you watch 40 people queue at the door at rush hour while the driver makes change. My buses cost $300,000, my own chassis design, licensed to Jiafang to manufacture, technology as equity, so I paid nothing and earned a cut of every unit anyone bought. Tickets sold before boarding, dedicated lanes where I could get them, and routes stitching the townships to the county to the city. The winter they came online, a snowstorm grounded the city fleet for a day and a half. My tourism civilization number ran the whole time. By the following spring, the construction bureau, which had inherited the money-losing municipal system like a hot dish nobody wanted, quietly paid me to take over the entire city's public transport. That's not a business victory, incidentally. That's the moment a company stops being a company. When the city hands you the buses, your infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't get run out of town by a rival chamber of commerce. Remember that. It matters when the war starts. The auto trade city. This one I'm sentimental about because of who ran it. Chen Mei-lin, the neighbor I'd been falsely rumored to be involved with, the woman who'd found me crying in a cornfield, walked into my office when I announced the project and said she wanted it. I said it was cars. She'd never sold a car. She said she'd learn. 2 weeks later, I found her at midnight in an empty showroom with a stack of manufacturer catalogs and a notebook, crying quietly out of pure frustration because none of it made sense yet, and she waved me off and told me to come back when I had something useful to say. 18 months later, that woman had 53 showrooms, a 90% market share in Ford across Dongshan, and a reputation among provincial dealers as the negotiator you send your second best man to face, because your best man comes back demoralized. Opening day broke 100 million yuan in sales. She built a car park where you could eat, drink, get your wedding photos taken, and buy any brand made, because I told her early that nobody wants to visit a car dealership. Everybody wants to visit a place that happens to sell cars. She took that sentence and built a small city out of it. Getting into cars at all involved 2 old men whose names I could not keep straight for a year. Zhou Cheng ran the Zhou Cheng Mover Sales Center, a county institution. His grandson was named Zhou Bo and ran the North Auto Trade City. His in-law was Zhou Dahai, my old Zhou, the fur legend, the man who would later buy me Siberia. Zhou Cheng, Zhou Bo, Zhou Dahai, all in one family, all in the same business, all present at the same meetings. I spent an entire negotiation addressing the wrong man twice and eventually started using their companies instead of their names, which is why my staff to this day refer to two of my most important partners as Mover and North Auto. Through them, I bought a struggling auto trading company outright, poached the best sales staff from Hongtu, and discovered the thing that made the whole sector work. The showroom is the product, not the car. Anyone can sell a car. What I sold was a building so obviously superior to the shed next door that the manufacturer inside it looked superior by association. And my showrooms were steel structure cathedrals I could put up in weeks for a fraction of what a concrete one cost. Wang Lingling's contribution to my automotive era was to hand me a ham the size of a fence post, Bronze Gong brand, her farm's first premium product, developed while I was busy being a magnet, and inform me it was going in every VIP gift basket at the opening. It did. We sold out the ham before we sold out the launch models, and my girlfriend's pork operation ended up cross-selling with a car dealership, which is not a synergy any business school teaches. Chen Qiang of Hongtu Auto Trading, my only real competitor in the sector, came to me with an Audi A6 as a goodwill gift and a wary expression. I gave him showrooms in exchange for equity in his company, which sounds generous and was actually a test. A dishonest man takes free buildings and runs. He didn't. So I handed him the driving school expansion and 2 more trade parks, and made a partner instead of a corpse. That decision paid me back with interest during the Ford War, but I didn't know that yet. I just liked the man. The film unit. Shu Hao Yu, my former disc peddler, got a camera department, and the first thing he asked for was permission to try a trick he'd seen in a foreign film, freezing a moment and orbiting it. I told him where to point the cameras and how many, and he went off and did bullet time on an arrow volley for a historical war epic in a Chinese county in the year 2000, which is a sentence I still enjoy. He also got the Art Institute students, a film and television center, and a standing instruction. Everything we make is premium, minimal budget, maximum craft, no garbage. He violated the spirit of that instruction constantly and produced excellent work anyway. The Design Institute. Professor Gao from the Civil Engineering College brought his faculty into my drafting rooms, 50 interns a semester, and my system-optimized structural drawings went in one end while proper engineering documentation came out the other. This is the part competitors never understood. My advantage wasn't cheap labor. Cheap labor is common. My advantage was that I could hand a professor a structure that already worked and let him spend his time explaining why, which turned a magic trick into a transferable technology and eventually into a textbook. The Intelligence Department. 5 reformed delinquents from my earliest days, Little Bo, Little Jing, Little Tao, Little Wei, Little Yan, one posted to each county I operated in. This started as babysitting and became, without anyone planning it, the best commercial information network in the province. Because here's what nobody accounts for. Every county's troublemakers know every county's business. Who's behind on payments? Which official's nephew got a contract? Which company just missed payroll? I had employed all of them in 5 counties and given them expense accounts and pagers, and by the time my enemies started plotting against me, I was reading their internal numbers before their own finance departments compiled them. And Tianxi decoration, which I mention only to admit that I nearly missed it entirely. My second uncle Guo Li Hua ran it as an afterthought, interior finishing for our own apartments. I checked its books during a slow week and discovered 70 million in available funds, 50 million of it profit, and customers who had prepaid for renovations on apartments in a development I hadn't broken ground on yet. People were paying deposits on the interiors of homes that did not exist. That's when I understood that Tiancheng had crossed a line. We weren't selling buildings anymore, we were selling the future, and the customers had started arriving early. I even collected a little brother. Leo, sole heir of Da Tai Construction, grandson of the 2 old foxes who'd tried to scam me at auction, showed up after the dust settled, declared me his big brother with the seriousness of a court oath, and took over Da Tai Road and Bridge. I gave him a highway contract, and he built it dawn to dark for 4 months without missing a joint. Playful kid, solid engineer. Keep him in mind, he matters later. And Shaoqing Mountain, the worthless rock I'd grabbed to strangle a chemical plant, had quietly become the strangest asset in my portfolio. I'd promised the township a tourism zone as an improvisation. What got built was a full Haoyu Dynasty city. Walls, gates, streets, inns, pharmacies, grain stores, a temple, a market square, all of it raised by system builders out of my own timber and my own quarried stone at costs my accountants initially refused to enter into the ledger because they thought they'd misread the decimal. Around it, rafting on the fast river, a bandit road on horseback, an archaeological site that kept producing genuine bronze, and my own hospital and hotel at the foot of the hill. Then the television drama shot there, and the mountain stopped being a project and became a phenomenon. Over Spring Festival, I opened the whole zone free, zero ticket revenue, on purpose, and took 30 million yuan in food, clothing, books, crafts, and performance sales in a week. Peak days ran 100,000 visitors through a valley that 6 months earlier had held goats. Every merchant on that mountain cleared roughly 20,000 yuan in a week, in a county where a good annual wage was 7,000. And after that, I never had to advertise a stall for rent again. Free admission, by the way, was not generosity, and I want to be honest about that. A ticket is a decision at the gate. Free entry removes the decision and puts 100,000 people inside a valley where I own every noodle stall, every guest house, every parking space and souvenir. People walked out having spent 300 yuan each, convinced they'd had a free day out. The best business model is the one your customer thanks you for. Which brings me to the money, because all of this cost more than it earned, always, in every single quarter. That's what nobody understands about builders. Revenue looks enormous, and cash is always gone, because every yuan is already inside somebody's foundation. So before Spring Festival, I went to the banks and borrowed 1.1 billion yuan against qualifications, land, technology patents, and a project pipeline stretching to 2002, and by the second day of the new year, I had distributed all of it and had 355 yuan left. 1.1 billion in, 355 out, in one working day, and my total corporate debt at 1.4 billion. My father, when he heard the number, offered to give me 50 meters of belt. Ma Chang, when he heard it, went pale and told his people that Tiancheng's capital chain was its one weakness, and that if anyone could stop me acquiring new land, I would collapse. He was right, incidentally. That was the correct read. It was the strategy the entire Triple Alliance eventually settled on, and the reason the Garden District auction became the battlefield it did. Speaking of Ma Chang's misfortunes, his broken leg, which he blamed on me loudly and publicly for months, was actually Pan Changming's doing, his own brother-in-law, over a business dispute, in a private room, before this story's final act. I mention it because it explains everything Ma Chang did afterward, and because it is the single most important structural fact about my enemies. They were an alliance the way a bag of cats is a team. All of which is to say, by the time the Shunhe Chamber of Commerce declared war on me, I was no longer a village curiosity. I was the fastest growing enterprise in the region, up to my eyeballs in public projects, and exactly cash poor enough to be worth attacking. Enter the Triple Alliance. Kong Jian, boss of Shunhe Trading, top 10 enterprise in G City. Hotels, dance halls, bathhouses, auto trading, a chamber of commerce with 45 member businesses, and a quiet side business importing foreign goods that the Security Bureau was very interested in. Old school operator. The kind of man who solves problems with envelopes and, when envelopes fail, with people who don't leave receipts. Pan Changming. Changming Industry, a Jiangnan super enterprise. Enormous, patient, fat in the way a python is fat. His brother-in-law, one Ma Chang. His new in-law, via an arranged engagement between their children, Kong Jian. Yes, my three enemies had merged into a single extended family through marriage, specifically to fight me. I have never felt so flattered in my life. Their opening play was genuinely good, and I want to give it its due before I describe what I did to it. Step 1. A retail dumping war. 45 Shunhe member businesses versus my chamber's shops. Prices below cost on daily goods across G City, funded by Changming Industries' factory output shipped in at production price. On paper, my side loses. They had a Jiangnan super enterprises supply chain behind them, and my members were county factories and family shops. Step 2, and this was the elegant part. District G. They quietly reopened sales in a development next to my G City Star Moon Bay at a loss, specifically to bleed off my buyers during my pre-sale window. Step 3. While I was distracted defending retail, Changming Building would break ground in the city center, and Jiangnan product would flood into G City through it permanently. Pan Changming's whole theory of me was that I was a construction man playing at commerce, and he was correct. Retail is not my sport, so I refused to play it. Instead, I did 3 things. I told my chamber members to hold the line on retail and eat the losses, and I covered them. The whole retail front was a skirmish worth 2 or 3 million to either side, pocket change to enterprises our size, and I let them think it was the main theater for as long as they'd believe it. Meanwhile, I moved my actual weight into the sector where I couldn't lose, construction. And I sent little Tao and the intelligence department to find out what Kong Jian's money actually did all day, which is how I learned that a sizable share of his fortune came from foreign goods. Used Western clothing and electronics shipped into southern ports, cleaned up, relabeled, and sold to fashion boutiques in Beijing as new. Not my business to prosecute. Very much my business to know, and to make sure the right department knew I knew. Then Kong Jian made it personal. And I want to be honest about the sequence here, because he escalated first, and I escalated worse. He had my District G buyers harassed. He ran rumors through my construction sites about delayed wages. That didn't take. He seeded a story about illegal detention. That didn't take either. So his people started assembling a file of manufactured evidence about my personal conduct, mistresses, drugs, the standard package, and sat on it, waiting for the day they could get an insider to deliver it. So one evening, my people collected him from his own parking garage, drove him to the Grand Canal development, and introduced him to a tower crane. Now, a tower crane at night, from the hook, over a black canal, is an educational experience. My operator was a professional, and my safety rigging was rated well above the load of one middle-aged trading magnate. Nobody hit him. Nobody threatened him. That's important. That's the whole art of it. We simply gave him a slow vertical ascent, a long pendulum swing, a few rotations, and a great deal of time in the dark above the water to consider his position and the position of his ankles relative to the ground. Around 3 in the morning, I'm told, he began negotiating with the crane. By dawn, he had developed a deep, personal, almost spiritual relationship with solid ground. And by the weekend, Kong Jian, a top 10 enterprise boss in his own city, a man with 45-member businesses and a hotel with his name on it, had booked a flight to North America for business and left his empire to fight me on autopilot, which is the single most eloquent performance review I have ever received. I want to pause on my own methods here and be honest. Dangling a man from a crane is not in the management textbooks. In my defense, he had just tried to bankrupt half the small businesses in my chamber. The law of 1999 moved slower than money did, and I made sure the safety harness was rated. He came back down with all his parts and a new perspective. Some executives pay for retreats like that. While Kong Jian toured North America involuntarily, I dismantled his kingdom the boring way. Start with the hotel, because the hotel is my favorite. Shunhe Hotel, 4 stars, the best address in G City, the crown jewel of his portfolio, and the place where every deal in that town got signed. You cannot buy a hotel out from under a man who isn't selling. You cannot burn it down, obviously, and I want the record to show I never considered it. But a hotel is not a building. A hotel is 190 people who know how to run it. I walked into the staff canteen at shift change with 2 suitcases of cash and my HR director, and I made a speech that took 90 seconds. Anyone here who works at Shunhe, I'm hiring. Same job, same shift, better title. Salary is 1.5 times what you're making now. In writing, contract today, first month advanced in cash. I opened the suitcases. Chefs, front desk, housekeeping, maintenance, drivers. I looked around the room. The cleaning aunties, too. Especially the cleaning aunties. You're the only people here who know where anything is. An old woman in the back asked if it was a joke. It was not a joke. By 6 that evening, I had signed 170-odd people. Head chef, sous chefs, the entire front office, the maintenance man who understood the boiler, the 4 drivers, and yes, every cleaning auntie in the building. My hotel division absorbed all of them into the Guyue chain and the Grand Canal Hotel I'd just acquired, at real wages, with contracts, and they went home that night to tell their families they'd gotten raises. And Shunhe Hotel, fully furnished, fully booked, 4 stars, immaculate, opened the next morning with no staff. Not a skeleton crew. None. The building stood there gleaming and empty like a museum of hospitality, and the manager stood in the lobby personally checking in guests he could not feed. And the estimate that came back to me later was that it couldn't reopen properly before the Lantern Festival, a full month, in the highest revenue season of the Chinese year. Was it expensive? Enormously. 2 suitcases and a permanent payroll increase. Was it legal? Completely. Every one of those people chose freely and improved their lives, and not one of them ever went back. That's the thing about the brutal business tactics in this story that I'd like on the record. The crane ride was theater, but the hotel raid was just paying people more than the man who'd been underpaying them for a decade, and it hurt him worse than anything else I ever did. The hiring raid produced one collateral incident I have to own. That same evening, I had a dinner scheduled with leader Wang Zihong, the city's top man, at a hotel whose name, in my defense, shared 2 characters with Kong Jian's. I walked into the wrong one. Specifically, I walked into Kong Jian's rival's hotel. I was mistaken for the evening's guest of honor. I was seated. I was toasted. I was halfway through the cold appetizers when the actual city leader phoned to ask where I was. So I stood up in front of a private room full of strangers who had spent 20 minutes nodding respectfully at everything I said, apologized for attending their banquet, and left. To this day, I don't know whose dinner I improved. Leader Wang Zihong has never let me forget it. Check the sign first became his standard toast at my expense for a full year. His chamber members watched the dumping war eat their margins and defected to my chamber by the dozen. His bathhouses, well, I'll get to the bathhouses. The bathhouses deserve their own moment. And then, 3 days before Chinese New Year, at dawn, a night shift truck from the Chongming building site ran a red light and hit my car. I woke up 2 days later in a military hospital in Ji Prefecture with a plastered right leg, a surgically repaired left arm, a bandaged head, and my entire family arranged around the bed in order of how likely they were to cry. My mother was peeling an apple with the intensity of a woman who intended to fight the apple. Master Ren, the old chef I'd once rescued from a scam, now the finest cook on my payroll, had set up a full field kitchen down the hall because in his medical opinion, there was no injury Kanji couldn't outflank. "Where is this?" I asked when I could focus. "Ji Prefecture Military Region," said my father. "The affiliated hospital didn't have your blood type. Ours is the same, but I couldn't give enough, and rather than drive the blood over, they brought you here by ambulance." And while he was still explaining, Gao Jian walked in with a bowl of congee and side dishes. I want to mark this because it's the one debt in my ledger that came back with interest. This is the man the county had once mistaken for a Hong Kong tycoon, who was in fact a retired master chef who had given away every yuan he had to a village school and was too proud to say so. In another life, he died with his name ruined for a fraud he'd bankrupted himself to prevent. In this one, he had driven half a province to stand in a military hospital kitchen at dawn because the boy who'd hired him had been hit by a truck and might wake up hungry. "Master Ren," I said, "you actually came." "As long as you can talk, that's good." He set the bowl down. "Eat. Whatever you want later, I'll make it. The chef from the food stall came too." The police report was almost disappointing. No assassin, no conspiracy. A newlywed driver who'd borrowed money for his truck worked through the night before the holiday, drank half a bottle to stay awake and the other half to celebrate finishing, and never saw the light. He didn't even run, stopped 200 meters on, and waited to be arrested. The city checked every wiretap they had inside the Shunhe organization, and there was nothing. Just a tired man, a truck, and me. I'd spent 2 lifetimes learning that most disasters are somebody's scheme. It costs me something to tell you that this one was just Tuesday. The driver and his wife were preparing to sell their truck and their house to pay damages. I told them to sell neither. They both work for my company now. That's not softness before you say anything. A man who stops and takes responsibility when running was free is a man I can build with. Softness is what happened next, when I checked the system map from my hospital bed and found something that made me forget my broken leg entirely. Lao Hong was Corridor the Pacific Ocean. I need to introduce Lao Hong properly, because this old man is about to hijack the story the way he hijacks everything. Lao Hong was my chief mechanic, a genius with machines, allergic to paperwork, brave in the way that only people with no understanding of consequences can be. Months earlier, I'd sent him to North America on a simple mission: acquire a small remote control research institute, legally, with legally transferred funds. Simple, clean. What could go wrong? What went wrong, in order? The acquisition fell through. The institute wouldn't sell. Lao Hong's response to this setback was to not buy the institute and instead hire everyone inside it, which, I want to note, is the better deal, and I'd never have had the nerve to try it. He parked outside their office with a security detail and 6 suitcases, offered every researcher a signed contract and a stack of cash on the spot, and walked out with the staff, the department heads, and their newly appointed chief executive, leaving behind an empty building he had never needed in the first place. I asked him later how he'd gotten 50-odd scientists to sign contracts with a Chinese construction company they'd never heard of in a language most of them didn't speak on a sidewalk. "Boss," he said, "I put the money on the ground and stood next to it." Then, because he was rolling, he did it again at a graphics chip company that was going bankrupt. I had once, in passing, during a conversation about our special effects computers, mentioned that a firm called 3DFX was in trouble and it'd be nice to have some of their people. Lao Hong treated this offhand remark as a purchase order. He lined up my security in front of their entrance, set down 6 suitcases, and hired the graphics engineers too. Also, some language programmers. Also, it later emerged, several people from an aerospace firm, which is a sentence I did not learn until a provincial leader read it to me off an official document in front of an audience. At this point, he was sitting on a very large amount of company cash in a country he did not intend to remain in and no legal way to move it. His solution, and this is where a normal man calls his boss, was to decide banks were a trap and buy a 20,000-ton decommissioned oil tanker. The reasoning was actually sound, which is the horrifying part. Register an offshore company in the British Virgin Islands through a researcher's contacts. Buy a phased-out tanker in Los Angeles under the company's name. Sail it home with 50-odd researchers aboard as crew, sell it in Taiwan through an agency, deposit the proceeds as legitimate trade funds. He walked me through the whole structure over a bad international line while I lay in a hospital bed with my leg in plaster, and when he finished, I said the only thing a legitimate enterprise can say. "Lao Hong, Tiancheng Construction is a legal company. Forget the funds, forget the tanker, come home." "Boss, I'd love to, but I've been captured by the Russians." So, he'd loaded 50-plus scientists onto a decommissioned tanker crewed by people whose expertise was remote control robotics. Planned a quiet route home via Hawaii, and somewhere near Midway Island, the ancient navigation equipment failed comprehensively. The crew, researchers, learning navigation on the job, in cloudy, rainy weather, from a backup paper chart, sailed the wrong way for 4 days. Nobody noticed. What eventually alerted them was that it kept getting colder, and then somebody looked out at a horizon made of ice. "I knew we were nearly at the Arctic," Lao Hong told me proudly. "That's the Bering Sea." "Ah, boss, how do you know?" "Because to get to the Arctic, you have to pass through the Bering Strait, and it's frozen solid this time of year." "Indeed. I even suspect we could walk from Asia to North America along the ice." I put the phone against my chest for a moment and looked at the ceiling of my hospital room. They were heading for the Arctic. They found the Bering Sea by ice recognition. And then, hugging the coastline home with a backup paper chart, they sailed straight into a Russian military port in the Sea of Okhotsk, flying a North American flag, in January. On the map in my hospital bed, I watched their little white dot park itself inside a naval base and stop moving, and then my phone rang, and Lao Hong's voice said the sentence every employer dreams of. "Boss, it's me. Come save me." The Russians, to their credit, were more confused than hostile. A dozen frozen border sailors had watched a civilian oil tanker cruise into their snowed-in base, cheered because they thought it was the supply ship, discovered it was full of foreign researchers and biscuits, confiscated the biscuits and a box of cigars, and told everyone to stay aboard while somebody figured out what any of this was. Which is how I ended up conducting international diplomacy from a hospital bed, in Russian, through a language system, with a broken arm. And here, fate handed me one of its strangest gifts, in the shape of an old man named Zhou Dahai. Old Zhou, a legend of the Domshan fur trade, who'd spent decades running goods through the Russian Far East, spoke the language, drank the drinks, and had just come back from attending medal ceremonies with retired Russian generals as a personal guest. I'd gotten drunk with him once weeks earlier, and apparently, asked him to buy me some decommissioned tanks, as a joke. I want to be very clear that at the time, I believed it was a joke. Old Zhou did not do jokes. Old Zhou did procurement. So when my people got stuck in a Russian naval port, I had exactly the right lunatic on call. He worked his contacts, the Magadan governor got involved, and the conversation with the base commander took a turn I still can't fully explain, because at some point the Russian Navy, half a year behind on salaries, guarding a fleet it couldn't fuel, stopped interrogating my employees and started selling me things. Here's how it actually went, because I was there for all of it, in a hospital gown, working a laptop one-handed. Old Joe, phone in hand, mouthed at me, "They're listening to this call." So I switched my language system to Russian and made the only move available. I stopped explaining and started asserting. "This is Sansha Township Tiancheng Construction Limited Liability Company. Last week, we submitted a trade application to the Far East Federal Border Guard for the procurement of decommissioned tanks and aircraft. Total value $60 million. The tanker your people are detaining belongs to the personnel who came to purchase Me-26 helicopters. Transaction location, the Magadan Free Economic Zone." Silence. Then a rustle, a click, a change in the line quality. Somebody had switched frequencies on the communicator we'd given Lao Hong, and a deep, bored, extremely Russian voice cut in. "You don't need to go to Magadan. There's only one there, and it's not for sale. But we have many, many here in the Navy. I want you to understand the moment. I had bluffed a purchase order into existence to keep my employees out of a spy investigation, and the Russian Pacific Fleet had responded by opening a sales conversation. The Me-26, the largest and heaviest helicopter in service anywhere on Earth. 40 meters long, rotor radius 32, empty weight 28 tons, max takeoff 56. Cargo bay that swallows 2 armored personnel carriers, or 20 tons of anything else. Export price, $10 million in foreign currency, and that quote was 10 years stale. I pulled up everything I had. First-generation models were going for under 7. The upgraded A version with integrated flight control was the 10 million machine. Ukraine had photos online of 30 of them being stripped for parts in an airfield. And the reason the sellers were so eager, per Old Joe, the Far East Navy hadn't been paid in 6 months, and their Air Force MiG pilots were on hunger strike. So I opened low, expecting to be laughed at and to settle around 7. Me-26A, 5 million each. I want 4. 5 million? What a terrible offer. Damn it. Hell. Screw it. Sold. I sat there with the phone against my head bandage doing rapid arithmetic on how badly I had just overpaid for 4 aircraft I had not intended to buy. That feeling, that specific "did I bid too high" nausea, is the most year 2000 Russia emotion available to a human being. Rubles? I tried. This terrible call. I suspect I am sleeping. Who woke me up? Sorry, foreign currency, of course. Foreign currency. I recovered. Mr. Navy, you're not selling me scrap, are you? I need these to actually lift things. What we are selling is not toys. They are planes, big ones. We will also arrange pilots, instructors, and flight engineers from the manufacturer, because the operating system is complex. If it were scrapped aircraft, why would I create so much trouble for myself? Then, happy cooperation. I am not happy at all. To cheer him up, I asked whether they had any light medical transport helicopters. They did, enthusiastically, and invited my personnel to come visit the Naval Aviation Department, which was a lovely offer that later collapsed on export control grounds because the light models were, ironically, too advanced to sell. The heavy lifters nobody else could fly, those they'd hand over gladly. They also offered to sell me an aircraft carrier. 50,000 tons, 273 meters, laid down in the 60s, parked at an Arctic port. 10 million. I was drinking water when that sentence arrived, and most of the water ended up on my nautical chart. I declined the aircraft carrier. I want it noted in the permanent record that when offered an aircraft carrier at a discount, I said no, because it would have been rusted through, and because I already had one oil tanker I didn't want, and because there are limits, and I found mine that afternoon. I bought 4 Mi-26s and 20-odd retired mill factory grandfathers to keep them alive, and then, to be thorough, I placed the tank order too, Type 80 hulls at 200,000, wheeled transports at 100, weapons stripped, engines and comms retained, for tourism, 20 of each. And I sent Old Joe, a man who had been off a plane for less than 4 hours, straight back to the Far East to close it, with gift money for the border officials, because at that point a few stacks of cash to men who hadn't been paid in half a year was less a bribe than a public service. And Lao Hong? Released with apologies, escorted out by 2 warships like a dignitary. And on the way home, this man noticed that crude oil was cheap in North America, had already filled his tanker's belly with 37,000 barrels on a whim, and got flagged down near Vladivostok by a South Korean petrochemical buyer offering nearly double what he'd paid. He sold the load on the spot. The man had accidentally ridden one of the wildest oil price surges of the decade, top to bottom, without once knowing what a futures market was. His profit covered every mistake of the entire voyage, with change left over. I confronted him about it later, genuinely rattled. Lao Hong, Be honest, which of us is the reincarnated one? He asked for a raise. I pointed out that he had left the country without authorization, bought a ship without approval, missed an entire month of work, and was therefore not only unpaid for that month, but liable under Tiancheng's own attendance rules for 1,600 yuan in lost work penalties. Also that customs had confiscated his cigars. Boss, he said, wounded to the soul, you still owe me 30 million. How could I possibly blow you up? That sounds reasonable and feels wrong. I sent him to inventory the tanker. While all this transpired, my hospital life had developed its own plot, and I have to tell the Chen Mei Lin part properly because it's the closest thing to a love scene this story is getting, and it happened at knife point, sort of, eyeliner point. It was past midnight. The ward door opened very quietly, and Chen Mei Lin came in on tiptoe with her eyes red from 2 full days of not sleeping. I'd been unconscious for 2 of the 4 days she'd been in that hospital, and she had not, per the nurses, gone home once. You're not asleep, she said. What do you want? Don't tell me you're going to take advantage of the situation. And then she started unbuttoning her wool coat, and I lost the sentence entirely. Holy, are you crazy? If I don't do it now, I won't get another chance. Get off, get out of here. Ha ha ha, someone surnamed Guh. You have your day too. Are you insane? Do you know how scared I was these past 2 days? No, get down first. I won't. I'm calling for help. Humph. However loyal your heavenly guards are, they're not going to interfere with me, are they? And they did not. My personal security, elite men who would walk into a knife for me, had collectively decided that whatever was happening in that room was a family matter and had gone very still in the corridor. How can you be like this? I said, with as much dignity as a man in traction can manage. My leg is broken. My hand is broken. Don't you feel bad? I do feel bad. I haven't slept in 2 days, but with Wang Ling here the whole time, what could I do? If I don't do this today, I really won't get another chance. Then she produced, from behind her back, an eyebrow pencil, a lipstick, and a compact of foundation, and proceeded to do a full, meticulous, extremely committed theatrical makeup job on my face while I lay there immobilized. Is it done? Why aren't you panicking anymore? Struggle, cry out. I'm letting you have your way. If you want to look at me, look. You didn't have to use makeup as an excuse. She stopped for a second at that, and I caught her expression in the moment before she covered it. The whole exhausted, complicated, 2 sleepless nights weight of it, and then she snorted and climbed off the bed. Boring. At the door, she turned around. The 2 of us are impossible, I told her, because somebody had to say it plainly, and it was going to have to be me. Heh, said Chen Mei Lin. Your wife will be mine sooner or later. And she left. I lay there in full stage makeup at 1 in the morning in a military hospital, staring at the closed door and trying to work out which of the several available interpretations of that sentence I was supposed to survive. Then my sister came in with Wang Ling on the phone, took 1 look at my face, and covered the receiver. I told her the doctor was examining you, my sister said, and I'm now going to keep telling her that until you wash. And in the ward next door, I am not making this up, Ma Chang checked in. My oldest rival had been stabbed 7 times, not by me, not by Kong Jian, by the furious husband of a nurse Ma Chang had gotten involved with during his previous hospitalization. The husband worked, technically, for one of my subsidiaries, which for one horrible news cycle made it look like I'd ordered a hit on a man in a wheelchair as revenge for my car accident, which had itself looked like his family's hit on me. The city's front pages had us in a gang war. The actual truth was a drunk driver and an angry husband, 72 hours apart. The police announced both cases solved and unrelated, and the leaders closed the file fast, because the alternative, 3 billion yuan enterprises in a mutual assassination spiral during Spring Festival, was not a headline anyone wanted. Ma Chang called me from his ICU bed, voice like a leaking tire. It wasn't me, and it wasn't you. We're fellow patients now, aren't we? Fellow patients. I hung up on him. He had survived 7 stab wounds, mostly out of spite, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little relieved, and I'd be lying twice if I told you why. Then the newspaper happened. A radio reporter had spent weeks assembling the whole saga on video and film. The station's leadership killed it as too disruptive to public order, so the reporter sold it to a weekly paper, and that paper, which had been dying for a story that would make it matter, ran the entire thing with photographs 3 days before New Year. The crane ride, the 2 suitcases in the hotel, the cleaning aunties, the bathhouse expedition, the bulldozers at the dance hall, Ma Chang's broken leg and who actually broke it, Kong Jian's midnight flight abroad. The Property Trap in District G, The Ford Scheme, and a section sourced from a boasting grandson about Ge Baiyi buying aircraft in the Russian Far East. G City read it like a serialized novel. I have transcripts of the department store conversations because my intelligence department, in a fit of thoroughness, went and wrote them down. Guo Tianming carried 2 large suitcases of cash and poached every single member of the Shunhe hotel staff. Even the cleaning ladies? How much hatred must there be? Kong Jian was kidnapped and played with on a tower crane all night, vertical lifts, pendulum swings, spinning, and then fled the country? Ma Qiang is Pan Changming's brother-in-law, and Pan Changming is Kong Jian's in-law, so what's Ma Qiang to Kong Jian? Who cares? It's a revenge war, obviously. Tiancheng fighting 3 at once, that's rough. Who in G City has Tiancheng ever feared? Didn't Da Tai Construction run away just the same? Keep reading. Ge Baiyi went to the Far East to buy planes. What kind of garbage newspaper is this? It has a basis. Zhou Dehai, the fur legend. 3 days ago, he attended medal ceremonies for Russian generals. His own grandson said so. He might actually buy them. What's he going to do with them? He'll be locked up by then. Are you stupid? That last exchange, my analyst noted, ended in a long silence and someone saying, "That's ruthless." The practical effect was immediate. 45 member businesses of the Shunhe Chamber of Commerce read that paper, calculated their odds, and closed for the holidays early. Some afraid of having their windows broken, most simply concluding that sitting in a shop losing money during someone else's war was a poor use of a new year. By the time my intelligence department finished counting, exactly 2 of the 45 were still trading, a bathroom fixtures store and a stove shop. The report on my desk was almost clinical. Shunhe Trading's 21 shops, unsold holiday stock, defecting distributors, 500,000 lost, and climbing toward 900 with rent and spoilage. 2 auto trade cities, slow. The hotel, out of action for a fortnight minimum. The commercial building, recruiting tenants, not optimistic. And at the bottom, in my analyst's careful phrasing, however, in overall calculations, Kongjian's industries remain profitable. Which is exactly what I needed to see. Because it told me the retail war had always been a sideshow, 2 or 3 million either way, pocket change, and the man's real money came from somewhere the newspapers couldn't reach. That's when I started asking harder questions about where Kongjian's fortune actually came from, and got the answer that eventually put the security bureau in his affairs and me permanently out of his reach. Hospital television, meanwhile, introduced me to my own show, because while I'd been getting hit by trucks, my media division had quietly become a provincial phenomenon. Months earlier, I'd greenlit a scene drama, a water margin adaptation filmed at my mountain's ancient city, using my elite workers as actors. The workers couldn't act, but they could fight. And the production had solved this with a trick I only decoded watching from my sickbed. Every combat close-up was slow motion, because hidden behind each actor, my 2 martial arts masters, Ren Xian and Hao Yuan, were physically guiding the soldiers' strikes like puppeteers of violence. Real force, real impact, invisible choreographers. The fight scenes looked like nothing else on Chinese television because they weren't choreography at all. They were 2 hidden masters beating people up through intermediaries, in loving detail, 1 frame at a time. The province lost its mind over it. Dongshan Television's ratings tripled, at which point the station got greedy, aired all 12 episodes in a single day, twice, preempting even the cartoon block, and every county station in their broadcast agreement rose in open revolt over being handed leftovers. I mediated the treaty from my hospital bed. 2 more days of provincial broadcast, then the rights cascade down, penalties for breach. Media diplomacy conducted in a cast. Success went straight to my director's head. Xu Haoyu burst into my ward pitching his next production, a fast-motion kung fu comedy where every punch is shown a dozen times from alternating sides, a technique he described with the fervor of a man inventing cinema, and I recognized, with dawning horror, as a shot-for-shot rediscovery of movies that wouldn't exist for a decade. Then he pitched a game adaptation with Leo cast as the villain lord. "Xu Haoyu," I said, "you're fired." He wasn't fired. He knew he wasn't fired. He came back the next day with storyboards, and I approved the historical war epic instead and sent him to the desert with 200 trained war horses, which, this is true, we later airlifted to the location by Mi-26, 4 horses at a time, making mine the only film production in world history with heavy-lift cavalry logistics. And the old man from the Veterans Resettlement Office came to visit me, the mysterious elder who'd arranged my hospital bed, who turned out to be the old village chief's wartime squad mate. He sat down, offered me a cigarette, and lit one himself. Then he spent 5 minutes describing 3 comrades who died of lung cancer in detail until I put mine out. Then he informed me that the treasured saber he'd sent me was a warning about lust. Then he requisitioned 100 of my future bus driver jobs for demobilized soldiers. Then he left. That old man extracted more value from a sick visit than most men get out of a board seat. I saluted his generation. He told me not to get involved in messy things. We both knew I would. My medical care, I should note, had gone off script in a very Tiancheng direction. Ren Xian, my resident master of suspiciously ancient knowledge, sent over a herbal ointment from the system's medical school with theory attached. Hollow-stemmed plants treat wind, thorned leaves reduce swelling, the whole 5 elements pharmacology, which he cheerfully described as ancient witchcraft that happens to work. The first application made my broken bones heat up, itch, go numb, and start knitting at a pace that made the military doctors reread my x-rays. I declined to smash off the cast early to test it further on the grounds that the county had already coined Ge the Cripple, and I refused to upgrade the nickname to a series. My distant third uncle contributed to my recovery in his own way. While demolishing the old brick kiln chimney, his crew dug out a 2-pound gold nugget, which he had recast into a pair of solid gold fitness balls as my get-well gift. Solid gold fitness balls. He then wore out his own wrist tendons playing with them before delivery, needed surgery, sold them to 7th Master, who also ended up in treatment, after which 2 more elders injured themselves on a bet. I confiscated the cursed objects, melted them into trophies, and made them the grand prize of a county-wide sled race on the frozen river, reasoning that gold that injures everyone who holds it should at least injure people competitively. New Year's Eve, my family finally went home to run the village celebrations, and I lay alone in the ward listening to the military district's fireworks-free festivities, phone buzzing with greetings from every partner, employee, and official in 3 prefectures, doing quiet math on the year. Sold for 8,800. Currently owing 1.4 billion. By any accounting standard, my value had improved. Kong Jian came back from North America with a 300 million contract and a plan. And I have to admit, on paper, the plan was good. Ford. He and Pan Changming had studied my Tianheng auto trading, the top Ford seller in 5 provinces, and decided to cut off its head. They paid 30 million to register Dongshan's first official 4S dealership, 200 million as a sales deposit, and convinced the Ford manufacturer to revoke my dealership qualification entirely. Not downgrade, revoke. From now on, if my auto trade city wanted Fords, I could buy them from Kongjian or truck them in from Beijing at a loss. A real blow, professionally delivered. So I responded professionally. I got on television and told the entire province that 4S stores were fake. I'm not proud of the logic, I'm proud of the execution. My propaganda chief, elegant, glasses, voice like a news anchor, went on the morning broadcast and explained, with charts, that a mysterious imitation showroom had appeared in G City, profiting from vehicles of abnormal channels, and that citizens should trust only the certified auto trade cities. Then she listed everything we had that a 4S store didn't. Chain after-sales service, fuel cashback, free roadside rescue by land and sea, free parking citywide, discounts on homes, hotels, restaurants. Tianheng Auto Trading has the largest car club in China. 4S stores don't. It went on so long Kongjian kicked his own television in and put his foot through the screen, which, given what was coming, counts as him getting off easy. Because in 1999, nobody in Dongshan knew what a 4S store was. There were maybe 2 in the entire country. The concept was genuinely advanced and completely unverifiable, which meant whoever spoke first, loudest, with the nicer buildings, won. And I had 53 showrooms, a chamber of commerce, and a television habit. Meanwhile, the bathhouses. I promised you the bathhouses. Kongjian's 3 bathhouses were reliable cash cows, so I bought a stack of recharge 500, get 200 free membership cards, and treated my brick kiln workforce, 1,000+ of the dustiest, burliest men in the province, to a company-paid deep clean before the holidays, with scrubbing attendance, non-negotiable. The water, I'm told, changed color in ways the other customers found spiritually upsetting. 5 or 6 of my guys per pool was enough. A full battalion emptied the building. Then, once everyone was clean, we anonymously reported the bathhouse's wastewater, now carrying an entire brick kiln's worth of iron and sulfur compounds, to the Industry Bureau, whose new pollution campaign fined Kongjian 500,000 and ordered 6 months of rectification. His other 2 bathhouses closed voluntarily. The men hadn't finished washing, you see. They simply proceeded to the next location. Then his 2 karaoke dance halls, guarded by a rent-a-thug named Zhou Chang. My guys arrived at 11 at night in their luxury vehicles, heavy trucks, bulldozers, excavators, each worth 400,000 to 500,000, which technically outpriced every sedan in the parking lot. 1,000-strong men with shovels and trowels, politely ordering cocktails and singing "The East is Red" until sunrise. No violence, no damage, just the least commercially viable atmosphere ever achieved in a nightlife venue. Zhou Chang took one look at the arriving convoy, ordered a subordinate to play dead, and fled on foot. Regular customers filed out whispering, "Big brother, you do your thing." Both halls closed by morning. I want to note for the record, every single one of these operations was legal, deeply annoying, strategically ruinous, and legal. When your enemy has spent 20 years assuming money and muscle are the only weapons, it turns out you can dismantle him entirely with memberships, labor law, and the environmental code. Kongjian returned to a kingdom of closed doors and one remaining hope, the 4S store's grand opening, 7th day of the new year, with leaders, media, and 3 real Ford factory engineers flown in as proof of authenticity. Except my 6 groundbreaking ceremonies were scheduled the same day. This needs context. Tiancheng's spring lineup had gotten slightly out of hand. The Lotus Sports Center, 3,200 people, 5 venues, earthwork starting immediately, foundation piles by May, topped out by November, finished May 2001, 17 months before the games. The small commodities market. 12 li of traditional-style shopfronts built along a stinking drainage ditch that we were about to convert into a navigable Lotus Canal, because I'd decided the laid-off workers and poor families of this county deserved a place to start businesses that looked like a scroll painting rather than a row of sheds. The affordable housing blocks. The logistics hub plan, the largest distribution center in Dongshan, 60% steel structure, plus a 99-meter tower. The Donghu Film and Television City, and the Flying Saucer Gymnasium's steel hoisting ceremony. 6 projects. The planning department proposed 6 separate ceremony days stretching to the Lantern Festival, and I looked at that schedule and thought about all those leaders sitting through 6 lunches. One day, I said, noon to 5, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They walk in, we cut a ribbon, they get back in the car. My planning chief pointed out that this meant 6 ribbon ceremonies in 5 hours across a development zone with unfinished roads. I arranged a motorcade of Tigerhead Benzes and Jinbei vans and pre-positioned 3 separate banquet setups so nobody would go hungry, thirsty, or tired, which, in my experience, is 90% of government relations. And then, because I cannot leave a thing alone, I added a detail. 500 female staff pulled from the hotels, customer service, and tourism divisions, rotating costumes at every single site. Cheongsams at the sports center, full Hanfu at the commodities market, Ruchun at the affordable housing, courier uniforms at the hub plan, Phoenix coronet and bridal robes, a full 10-mile wedding procession at the film and television city. Nobody was supposed to notice at Site 1, that was the design. By Site 3, the reporters had stopped filming the speeches. By Site 4, provincial television was running live coverage of a costume progression across a construction zone, and half of Dongshan was watching to see what came next. And then the thing I hadn't planned happened. Director Yu, the provincial leader, climbed the podium at the hub plan site to escape the crowd, shaded his eyes, and just looked. 200 heavy trucks, 50 bulldozers, 30 excavators, 50 tower cranes, gantry cranes, conveyor systems, thousands of men in camouflage and yellow vests digging, driving piles, pouring, welding, all of it running at once across the whole valley in a noise like weather. The 2 vice governors climbed up beside him, then the department heads, then the crowd below started climbing onto cars and earth mounds to see what the leaders were seeing. The photographers ran around to the west side of the podium and shot the whole thing from behind, the backs of the provincial leadership, silhouetted, looking out over the largest construction site in the province. That photograph ran everywhere. Not the costumes, not the speeches. 6 months of my work in one frame, and I wasn't even in it. I was in a Jinbei van in the parking lot with a broken leg, eating cold noodles. The tanks, meanwhile, had produced an unexpected complication, in that a private citizen buying 40 pieces of armor from a foreign navy raises questions in any country with a functioning government. Director Yu, the provincial leader, asked me about it directly at a banquet, leaning in over the vegetarian course. Why did you buy so many tanks? Those iron lumps aren't domestically manufactured. Many of their characteristics are complex. I asked what he meant. Listen to the song, he said. The banquet hall was playing a classic about a man abroad whose heart remains with his homeland, and 40 people had spent the first course singing along to it. I understood. He wanted the vehicles studied, the communications gear, the engines, the armor, and he wanted the civilian paper trail wrapped around it. Write the application yourself, he said, patting my shoulder. Submit it to the Jinsho River Task Force. Base the content on, well, the atmosphere tonight is quite good. Let's drink. So I wrote the application, and I want to quote myself because it is the finest document I have ever produced. It opened with Tiancheng's contributions to education. Nearly 100 donated Hope Primary Schools, a vocational college, then rural road construction, then bus routes, then dropout statistics and the problem of aimless country teenagers. Then the pivot. Graduates of private vocational schools cannot generally enlist. Every good young man dreams of military service. Therefore, our school had purchased 20 armored vehicles at great expense to run a dream realization project, a half-year military-style training program letting rebellious adolescents experience discipline firsthand. The public warmly invited to observe. Signed, a person who failed to realize his dream of joining the army. It came back approved, with a red header commendation attached praising Tiancheng's contributions and my personal pragmatism. And stapled behind it, a second document I had definitely not applied for. A recommendation for military service submitted on my behalf by the Sancha Township Militia Company. I read that twice. I owed 1.4 billion yuan due at year's end, and my local militia had nominated me for the army. That banquet also produced the 2 quietest conversations of my year. Director Chun took me aside. Director Chun, who had given me my first piece of land in Shang County when I was nobody, who had followed me up to Ji City, whose face was flushed and whose smile had something new in it. He and his wife had been trying for a child for years. He'd planned to go to Ji Prefecture for tests. Instead, he'd tried my new traditional Chinese medicine hospital on the mountain, out of loyalty more than belief. 1 course of medicine, he said. We had it confirmed yesterday. She might actually be pregnant. I have built stadiums. I have owned aircraft. Nothing in this story has ever landed on me quite like a 50-year-old official telling me that in a corridor, quietly, so nobody would overhear. I offered him a farmhouse near the hospital so his wife could stay through the pregnancy with my mother and aunts nearby, and he took it, and Wang Lingling ended up visiting her twice a week. Then he brought up the garden district. 200 mu in the city center, invited bid before it went to auction, and the city was prepared to let Tiancheng have it, he held up 3 fingers, at 300,000 a mu instead of 5. 60 million. A gift. 3 months earlier, I'd have taken it without blinking. No, I said. He waited. If I take the Park District, public transport follows me there. My buses, my routes, my stops. Which means the Shunhe commercial building gets a bus stop. The 4S store gets foot traffic. Chongming's tower gets an anchor. I'd be paying 60 million to build my enemies a customer base. I shook my head. The canal zone's worth as much, and it's mine already. If I want cheap land, I'll donate a library and ask again. Director Chen nodded slowly. I felt the same. Finish the canal, and you'll pull buyers from every district. You'll earn more than the park would give you. Then who's it for? The big boss says Pan Changming's ceiling is 300 million. If it's suitable, throw it out. Which is how I learned, a full week before the auction, that the entire Garden District affair was the city setting a price trap for a Jiangnan enterprise, and that I had just been quietly excused from it. I attended anyway. You've seen how that went. Back to the 7th, though, because while every leader in the province was standing on my podiums, Kong Jian was making decisions. The first was sensible. Postpone his 4S store opening from the 7th to the 8th, and catch the whole leadership on the rebound as they came back through the city. Fine. Correct, even. The second was where he stopped being sympathetic. He assigned his thug Zhou Qiang a dirtier job, fake a death, disrupt my ceremonies with a corpse. Zhou Qiang committed to the role. Fake employee ID, fake name, Zhou Hong, a bowl of rooster blood over the head, a stretcher, a quilt, and a crew of wailing relatives at my Crescent Plaza, demanding justice for a worker my company had killed. Reporters from 3 Jiangnan outlets appeared with suspicious punctuality. One problem. My propaganda chief checked the employee database. No such man, no such number. Second problem. My office keeps binoculars, and the corpse was breathing. So I sent an ambulance. You have never seen a deader man come more alive than a fake corpse hearing a real oxygen mask descend toward his face. My disguised security paramedics pinned him to the stretcher. The patient is delirious with pain, sedatives, increase the dosage, and rushed him, sirens screaming, to my own Qingshan hospital, where he woke up hours later in restraints in the ICU, listening to a press conference outside his door. After 5 hours of emergency treatment, Zhou Hong, wrongly declared dead, has been saved. A hired actor played his weeping elderly father for the cameras. Thank you, Qingshan Hospital. You gave my son a new life. While the real Zhou Qiang screamed, "He's not my dad," into a mask that the nurses interpreted as delirium. The reporters got a miracle rescue story. My new hospital got a province-wide reputation for raising the dead. Zhou Qiang got 7 days of recovery, a night shift cleaning the morgue he'd tried to work for, and a donkey cart discharge escort to a brick kiln in Nanhua, where I'm told he became quite a diligent digger. Kongjian's ceremony sabotage had become my hospital's launch campaign. He hadn't even opened his 4S store yet, and I want you to remember that, because the opening is where this war achieved its final form. Opening day, the 8th. Firecrackers, military band, a genuinely impressive showroom, 60 by 20 meters, built to Ford factory spec, 10 million total invested. Leaders arrived out of courtesy. Crowds arrived out of curiosity. And directly across the street, on a tea house's second floor, sat a certain man in a wheelchair with a banner, a hand-built LED sign, a projector, and a set of speakers wired by my own researchers. At the moment Kongjian's band struck up, my speakers answered with a song none of them had ever heard, because it wouldn't be written for another 15 years. A certain little Apple song. On loop. At parade volume. I need you to understand what this did to 1999 civilians. This melody is a cognitive weapon. The military band faltered, lost the beat, and surrendered. Within minutes, the crowd outside the 4S store was humming it against their will. Grown officials in the arriving motorcades were tapping the armrest. Kongjian stood in his own doorway, hearing his own opening drowned by a song about fruit, and the LED sign across the street lit up. Showroom, big promotion, Tiancheng. Because here was the beautiful part, and it took Kongjian most of the day to understand what was being done to him. He had spent 10 million yuan on that showroom. Everyone in that crowd knew it, because the number had been in the papers. It was the whole point, the proof of seriousness, the thing that made a 4S store impressive. 60 meters by 20, factory specification, concrete main structure. And my banner, across the street, in numbers a meter tall, offered a 30 by 20 steel structure showroom for 1 million yuan, 60 by 40 for 2, 80 by 80 for 4, 100 by 100 flagship for 8, with fire systems, a small filling station, and a staff entertainment center thrown in free above 10 million. 7 showroom package deal, 6,660,000. Every wealthy man he had personally invited to celebrate his 10 million yuan building walked past a price list proving they could have 4 of them for the same money. The first was the new director of Wuzheng, the agricultural vehicle group, freshly restructured and short on capital. He came over out of curiosity, and I met him at the tea house door in my wheelchair. Single showroom's wrong for you, I told him before he could ask a price. You've got 5 product lines: cars, agricultural vehicles, equipment, electric, parts. You don't need a shop, you need a trade park like Zhou Cheng's. 10 showrooms at 60 by 20, staff housing, utilities, security, and chain after-sales across my whole chamber. 20 million, cost price, because you're the first deal of the day. He looked at the renderings. He looked out the window at Kongjian's single glass temple. He laughed the tired laugh of a man realizing something about his industry. I didn't expect a 20 million business to be settled just like that, he said, and signed. The LED across the street changed. Warmly congratulate Tiancheng and Wuzheng Group on reaching a 20 million cooperation contract. Director Yu's motorcade arrived at Kongjian's front door at that exact moment. Kongjian stepped forward to greet the provincial leadership and watched their heads turn toward my sign instead. His smile, per witnesses, froze in place and stayed frozen for approximately 4 hours. Ji Prefecture. Sinotruck came next. Their vice president had been invited by Pan Changming personally, and he wandered over out of curiosity about the advertisement. I gave him a sentence he couldn't refuse. Every heavy truck on every Tiancheng construction site in Dongshan is a rolling advertisement seen by every builder in the province, and I was about to need 100 light trucks, 200 medium, and a fleet of Steyrs for the university town. He traded me a heavy truck procurement contract for a 100 by 100 flagship showroom, walked outside to make a phone call, and came back having committed 30 million. The LED updated. Then it updated again. Then it kept updating, roughly every 20 minutes, all afternoon, in meter-high characters, directly across the street from the grand opening of my enemy's flagship enterprise, Chen Paper's new factory campus. 260 million. San Tui Machinery's new campus, over 300 million. Wei Family Textile, Pan Changming's own relatives, invited to his own event, 230 million. That last one deserves a moment of silence. Pan Changming was sitting inside the 4S store chatting with officials when he heard the number, excused himself to the restroom, and started phoning his own extended family one by one. Don't come. Why? Because I'm afraid you'll be scammed. Too late. They'd already crossed the street. There is no defense against your relatives doing arithmetic. Kongjian stood in his doorway, watching the counter climb past 400 million. He'd sold 5 million in cars that morning and been quite pleased about it. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and, per the crowd around him, said out loud to nobody, "Also, why are they calling me a big sucker?" Then he worked it out, and this is the part that broke him. His 10 million hadn't bought a building. It had bought a building, plus manufacturer equipment, plus a body shop, plus land rent. The structure itself was maybe 3 million, but he'd let the 10 million number run in the papers because it sounded impressive. And now, every businessman in Dongshan was standing in front of my price list, computing that Guo Tianming would have built the same shell for 2. He had spent a year and 300 million to open a store designed to destroy my auto business. He opened it, and by closing time, I had signed 500 million yuan in steel structure contracts at his event to his guests over his band with a net profit of 350 million and a project backlog stretching into 2002. By close of day, I had signed 500 million yuan in steel structure contracts at his opening to his guests over his band. His own event had functioned as my trade fair. The city talked about nothing else for a week, except for the part of the city that talked about the helicopters, because that was the exact moment Lao Hong chose to come home from Siberia. 4 of the largest aircraft of their kind on Earth crossed the skyline like flying apartment blocks and set down at my auto trade city in front of the entire stunned crowd. Kongjian watched them descend, and witnesses say he said, very quietly, "So big." Then his in-law Pan Changming, master strategist, comforted him. And by comforted, I mean this. Kongjian confessed the fake engineer fiasco. Pan Changming expressed his support by punching him in the chest. Kongjian's overworked heart fluttered twice and stopped, and the master strategist of Jiangnan stood over his collapsed in-law, shouting, "Watch your image, don't play dead," until somebody called an ambulance. He survived. My intelligence chief phoned it through with the urgency of a war bulletin, and I asked whether he was dead, and was told no, and asked why he was calling. Cruel? Maybe, but you weren't there for the Crane year. The Alliance regrouped around a new plan, counterattack at the upcoming land auction, and his real troubles hadn't even started because his fake Ford engineers had just gone missing. Missing in the sense that my intelligence department had noticed 3 genuine Ford factory engineers heading home to the airport, and I'd told my people to recruit them. Legally, I specified, 50,000 annual salary to start. If they refuse, negotiate harder. They did not refuse. which meant that when Kong Jian's people went to collect the engineers for his authenticity press conference, the engineers had already joined my research division, and Kong Jian's team had to scramble to hire random foreign tourists and coach them on what to say, a detail I archived carefully for later use. Off the Mi-26s, by the way, came a second surprise: 115 North American researchers in suits who lined up on my tarmac, counted off in formation, bowed in unison, and greeted me in front of the watching leadership of Dongshan province with the words, "Godfather is well." Lao Hong, sweating, explained that the researchers had concluded during the ocean voyage that we were a triad, that he had cried trying to correct them, and that their elected leader Ace had military trained them out of respect. I switched to English and told Ace to call me boss. He said, "Yes, boss," with the devotion of a man who believed he'd just been inducted. Every attempt I have ever made to convince these people I run a construction company has made them more certain I don't. Behind the researchers came a second delegation, 24 white-haired Russian gentlemen, some on canes, tottering across my tarmac like a chess club on tour. The mill factory retirees, flight instructors, maintenance engineers, an actual designer hired to keep my 4 giants flying and train Chinese pilots, since the operating manuals existed only in Russian, and the one demographic that could bridge the gap was grandfathers. I housed them separately from the North Americans, having briefly imagined 100 young researchers and 20 veterans of the Soviet aviation industry sharing a dormitory, and hearing, in my mind's ear, the first URA at 2 in the morning. Wang Ling arrived mid-landing with a trailer of meat for the site canteens, took one look at the helicopters, and went silent in a way I'd never seen. So I did what any man would do for the military-obsessed love of his life. I told her I'd bought them for her, from Siberia, to deliver pork. Her entire face lit up, the chief black cat dream igniting behind her eyes, and she said, "Really?" And I said, "Really, as long as you can fly them," which was extremely safe because the cockpit requires 5 crew and reads entirely in Russian. She spent the next hour humming and pushing my wheelchair around the airfield like a happy tugboat, and Lao Hong chose that moment to sprint over weeping, "Boss, I'm back," and got intercepted by a 2-meter guard with the words, "The boss is injured, be gentle." My airfield, ladies and gentlemen, my life. Between battles, the new year happened, and my family reminded me what I was actually building all this for. I say, the tween battles. What I actually had was a ceasefire with a countdown on it. Kong Jian's Ford weapon was still loaded. Pan Changming's 200 million was still parked in G City waiting for a target, and a 200 mu parcel in the city center was going to auction in 3 weeks that the Alliance intended to use as a knife. I knew all of that. I spent the ceasefire building arcade machines and arguing with my mother, because that is what the interval before a fight is for. My village celebrates like nowhere else. There's a standing tradition that ancestor worship must include donkey hooves for the old master's grave, because one year the family forgot them, my big brother fell mysteriously ill, the shamaness stood an egg upright on a mirror and demanded to know where the hooves were, and my father ran to the donkey meat shop at midnight. I was 6. The egg fell when the hooves arrived. My brother recovered by morning. I am an engineer, a materialist, and a man of science, and every single year we bring the hooves. My second uncle blew through, and he deserves proper billing. Of my father's 4 brothers, only second uncle joined the reconnaissance company, and he came back from the border unfit for ordinary life in a specific way. He simply could not stay in one place. So he bought a second-hand minibus and spent the following decades driving the country alone, working long-haul routes, fighting off highwaymen when necessary, and if he lost a fight, he'd concede politely and settle it later, quietly, which is somehow more frightening. He went through more than a dozen vehicles. He made good money. He never married. His other habit was Guo Jianjun, our village's resident menace, who, in another timeline, ruled that village unchallenged. Second uncle disliked him. So he would appear without warning, locate Guo Jianjun, beat him with a rolling pin, and disappear for 6 months. Then come back and do it again. By the village's estimate, this happened 40 or 50 times over the years. Guo Jianjun grew up in a world where the sky occasionally opened and delivered his uncle. He turned up in my hospital room cracking sunflower seeds by the window. He tried to hand me back 1.5 million for a car I'd bought him, a Daewoo that had broken down 30-odd times between Heihe and Zhanjiang, eating every yuan he earned. Then he mentioned, in passing, that he'd since had a private chat with the dealer's boss and obtained a 500,000 refund. I did not ask about the chat. I tried to give him a plane instead, an actual plane. I had spares by then. He settled for a luxury bus to convert, promised the old village chief he'd bring home a wife within the year, a vow extracted in front of witnesses, and vanished south in a cloud of firecracker smoke. And my father, my belt-wielding, sun-selling father, cornered me with a look I recognized because it's the one I make. His construction ambitions had collapsed up north, crew poached by me, awkwardly, contractor vanished with the funds, and one substation project overdue, threatening the only thing he'd built in 30 years, his good name. I offered to send a crew and fix it in 2 weeks. He turned me down. Your old man is also an ambitious person, he said, and took my mother, both aunts, and a squad of workers to the northeast to rebuild his own way, at -35, at 50-plus years old, because apparently the stubbornness in this family is load-bearing. I gave my mother a phone and told her to call when she got tired of it. She called to say Ice City was fun and roaming was expensive, and hung up on me. My family, ladies and gentlemen. The company, meanwhile, had developed a talent for growing while I wasn't looking. Exhibit A, the deliveries, which is where all of this stops being a story about schemes. Shang County Star Moon Bay had handed over a month earlier. 600-odd families with keys in their hands, in a county where a year and a half before, the tallest thing standing was a grain silo. G City Star Moon Bay's E and F zones were topped out, and G and H were 3 floors short, handover set for mid-March, about 200 million yuan coming back in. I walked Zone A one afternoon on my way to something else. Old men playing cards under a covered walkway that had been a drainage ditch, laundry on the balconies, a woman shouting at a kid on a bicycle in the courtyard where I'd stood in mud arguing about pile depth. My property staff in uniform at the gate, and the gate itself opening onto a commercial street with a cinema on it. You can talk about plot ratios for a lifetime, that's the actual product. And the decoration arm had quietly built a second business inside the first. Over 600 units fitted out in Xiang County, 70-odd commercial interiors, 700 more booked in G City before a single key was handed over. Exhibit B, Jinshu River, and the 7,000 mu I bought without quite meaning to. G Prefecture, the bigger city north of us, had a problem shaped like a valley. 50 li from the city center, in the southern mountains, sat 7,000 mu of weeds and gullies with no villages, no road, no water, and no electricity. Worthless. They sold it to me for 20 million because I said the words "University Town" in a meeting, and a special task force formed around me before I could clarify that I'd been thinking out loud. The logistics were absurd. No road meant building 50 li of road before a single dump truck could reach the site, and I couldn't afford 50 li of road, so that became a negotiation with G Prefecture that I won by pointing out the road would still be theirs in 50 years. No brick kilns nearby meant flying red brick and green tile in from Sansha Township by helicopter, which is why I'd stopped considering 4 heavy-lift aircraft an extravagance somewhere around the second week. And there was a reservoir next door that I'd have to pay to draw from, because in China you may own a valley and still not own the rain in it. But a university town isn't a building. It's a permanent population of tens of thousands of young people who need housing, food, transport, and entertainment for 4 years at a time, in a valley where I own everything. I'd seen what university districts did to land values over 20 years. I bought the weeds. Exhibit C, my vocational school. The plan was modest. A technical school at Jinshu River, first-year enrollment of 500, train my own crane operators and welders. What I had forgotten was that months earlier I'd befriended 4 fat rich kids from the G Prefecture Internet Cafe, surnamed, and I promise this is true, Kang, Haoyu, Ma, and Yu, like the Three Kingdoms had a reunion tour, whose families between them ran commerce, radio, television, and things one doesn't ask about. The 4 of them, out of pure gratitude and boredom, had appointed themselves my admissions office. They advertised on every channel their relatives controlled, in 4 provinces. They set up a marble-floored enrollment hall opposite the government compound with phone numbers that were all 8s. When I found out and called, they had enrolled 3,700 students. Plus, and I quote, 500 outer hall disciples, because they'd also been recruiting muscular men straight from the prison gates for what they believed was my martial organization. I hung up, dialed again, and pretended it was a wrong number. They interpreted my horror as ambition and bought more airtime. The Education Bureau eventually sealed their hall for 6 violations, which sounds bad but was actually the bureaucratic mating dance for, "We're upgrading your school to a real accredited institution, come sign properly." The fat kids thought they'd destroyed my empire and called me sobbing. I sentenced them to road building duty until they each lost 10 caddies. Teacher recruitment solved itself in the most embarrassing way possible. I ordered my HR department to go poach vocational school teachers, and HR gently informed me that we had already poached them all months ago. They were working as my site technicians at triple their old salary. I had been searching for keys that were in my own pocket, jingling. Exhibit D, the paperwork that mattered more than any of it. While I was in a wheelchair inventing arcade machines, Director Chen and my technical staff pushed through the construction qualification upgrade, and I want to explain what that meant because it is the least cinematic and most important thing in this entire story. Under our old grade, Tiancheng could build to a certain height, a certain span, a certain single building floor area, 12,000 square meters, which is why Building 1 in Zone A of Shang County Star Moon Bay is 800 square meters across and 15 floors tall, and 1 meter more would have been illegal. To build wider, I had to build shorter. Every design decision in my first 2 years was shaped by a number on a certificate. The upgrade lifted me to industrial and civil construction under 100 meters, structural work under 120, single buildings up to 40,000 square meters, spans from 27 meters to 39, which means the Grand Canal CBD's 99-meter towers become legal. The Crescent's landmark Star Tower becomes legal. A building of 1,290 square meters and 31 floors becomes legal, and suddenly I can design layouts and elevations and structures I'd been drawing for 2 years and filing away. Standing at the top of that Star Tower, you'd see the old town of Shang County to the west, shanties, tile roofs, tenements, and Star Moon Bay to the east, towers and neon. Same county, 18 months apart. That contrast was the entire sales pitch, and I didn't have to say a word of it. I just had to be allowed to build tall enough for people to see both at once. Exhibit E. The machine ran itself now, and I could prove it with 1 working day. Second day of the new year, from a hospital bed, laptop open on the blanket, I logged into our custom ERP. Yes, my rural construction company ran on enterprise software in the year 2000, my sister's computer science tuition paying dividends, and distributed 1.1 billion yuan across 11 projects before lunch. Hub Plan, 100 million. Grand Canal CBD, 100 million. University Town, 300 million. Yuan County subsidiary for Hao Yuge, who was even now driving into that donkey cart county in a wig. The man bought a wig for his director era, I found out from his own deputy, with 50 million and a mandate to conquer a prefecture. By evening, the remaining balance across all of Tiancheng was 355 yuan. Every fund had a foreman attached, and I had also, in passing, hired a new personal secretary. The Yuan County deployment deserves its own paragraph, because it's where I found out what my people had become. Yuan County belongs to He City, a prefecture on the far side of Dongshan that reform had simply skipped. 2 train stations, one of them abandoned, national highways gone to potholes, a place where the local definition of a successful life was a 2-story building on the main street, shop below, family above, and where a man who suggested moving into an apartment tower would be asked, kindly, what was wrong with him. The real estate market there was not weak. It did not exist, which is exactly why I sent Hao Yuge, my reformed racketeer, now a company director, to found a subsidiary and conquer it. He drove in on the second day of the new year in a black woolen overcoat, a dark blue tie, brown glasses, and, I learned this from his own deputy, who could not keep it to himself, a wig. The man had purchased a wig for his executive era. He spent the drive combing it in the mirror and asking Little Jing how the outfit looked, and Little Jing, whose entire personality is deadpan, told him that no amount of tailoring compensates for a forehead. And then Hao Yuge, wig and all, laid out a plan in that car that I could not have improved. Use the free land we'd traded for the Ancient City project, register the subsidiary, mortgage it, borrow 20 million against local goodwill, pre-sell Phase 1, announce 500 million to the public, then roll straight into the next county before anybody has finished reacting to the first. 50 million in hand, treated as seed capital for a prefecture. This is a man who, 18 months earlier, extorted a tailor for 100,000 yuan. Little Jing opened the car window as they entered town, a county that looked like a village, with a convoy of donkey carts hauling bricks down the main road, and Hao Yuge looked at it for a while and said, "Go for it," to himself, quietly, and went to work. He earned out that year. I want that on the record too, because the fun part of this story is the schemes and the crane rides, but the part I'd actually defend in front of a tribunal is that I took the county's worst men and gave them something to be, and they turned out to be extremely good at it. Somebody was going to have to stop me, and around this time somebody started trying. But that comes later, and it comes by post. Now, the secretary, He Mei, recruited by my HR chief Little Bo, presented to me sight unseen, and when I finally connected the name to the face, a sturdy, brilliant, extremely undecorative young woman that Little Bo had once failed to court, I realized my HR department had hired her at least partly as a prank on me, expecting the boss to flinch. The boss did not flinch. The boss noticed within 1 week that she'd flagged a budget hole in the small commodities market that 3 departments had missed, gave her signing authority, and sent Little Bo to shovel out the pig farm for the crime of treating a first-class analyst as a joke. He went. Every night for 6 days, without complaint, and came back oddly improved. It became a company institution after that, the pigsty as a management development program. My customer service girls eventually volunteered for it as a weight loss retreat, at which point I gave up trying to run a normal company at all. Exhibit F, my old rival who had transferred to my hospital. Ma Chang, 7 stab wounds in all, checked into Qingshan Traditional Chinese Medicine Hospital at 100,000 a day. You can't take money with you, he explained. I died once and had a great awakening, and acquired an electric wheelchair identical to mine. Identical because Xu Haoyu had built us both the same model. Fiber composite frame, first layer yellow cattle leather, rated to survive hitting a tank, equipped with, I found this out by pressing an unlabeled button, a child's toy gun sound module as its horn. Fire! Bang, 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 in a hospital corridor. And from the far end of that corridor, an answering wheelchair accelerated toward me, blasting, charge, ... with a delighted middle-aged man aboard. Now we're not just fellow patients, Ma Chang announced, ramming me at full throttle. We're comrades in arms. I want to describe our relationship at this point honestly, because I've called this man my enemy for a long stretch of this story. We raced wheelchairs in the corridor. He rammed me on purpose, repeatedly, citing the salesman's claim that the frame could survive hitting a tank. He tried to sell me information at 1,000,000 yuan an item, and I negotiated him down to a wheelchair. When I asked why he was paying 100,000 a day for a room in my hospital, he spread his hands and said he'd died once and had a great awakening. You can't take it with you. Eat well, drink well, leave a few 100,000 for the kids, spend the rest, or some bastard gets it. Then he talked me through the Garden District land, 200 mu in the city center, invited bidding, a plot ratio of 4.5, and pulled out a sheet of A4 paper to show me how a developer turns 200 mu into 400 million yuan. Floor heights pressed to the legal minimum. 32 stories where the rules allow 100 meters. Split the parcel. Put townhouses on half so the villa plot ratio reads low and pretty. Put towers on the other half, average the numbers, and tell each set of buyers the version of the truth they want to hear. Don't look at the density. Our real ratio is 3.2. Don't look at the ratio, look at the green space. I watched a man who'd been stabbed 7 times explain price per buildable square meter with a hospital pen, and I thought, in another life, we'd have been partners, and it would have been terrifying. Then we shared a pot of my homemade noodles. This requires explanation. My cooking is, by unanimous company opinion, a war crime. Xu Haoyu once heard me describing a recipe over the phone and started complaining reflexively. But I have exactly one dish. Fry the eggs first, then loofah and tomato, an onion, a splash of vinegar, 2 smashed garlic cloves, pour the eggs back in, add half a bowl of water and let it gurgle. Boil half a gin of dried noodles, rinse them cold, mix them through. Half a gin for 2 grown men. And over that pot we had the conversation that founded one of my better businesses. This is genuinely good, he said, mouthful. You cook? My dream was to be a chef. I really couldn't tell. I'm going to roll this out. Same base, different toppings. Mushroom and minced pork, shredded potato, potato and chicken, spicy pickle, pickled cabbage, green beans with meat, tomato, and egg. 4 liang of noodles, 1 meat, 1 vegetable, or 2 vegetables, or 2 meats. 2 yuan, 150, 3 yuan, depending. Packaged for takeaway. A noodle shop? You already have the canteen. The canteen's too big. 1,000 people queuing, collecting, hunting for a seat. Fine if you've got an hour. But a salesgirl in a shopping mall or an electronics market gets 10 minutes for lunch, and she's just graduated, and half of them are on trainee wages or no wages at all. I shrugged. Call it a benefit. From the Chamber of Commerce to its members and their staff. Ma Chang gave me a thumbs up with his soup hand. That's what I admire about you. You look kind-hearted, and you're quietly making money the whole time. He counted it off on his fingers. Big pot of stewed vegetables. 1 scoop, shake it twice. bits of fried egg, half a tomato, a section of loofah, half an onion, half a ladle of broth, 4 liang of noodles. That costs you 60 cents. You sell it at 150 and call it welfare. Isn't labor money? Isn't rent money? Isn't gas money? Do tables and chairs grow on trees? Tiancheng owns the vegetables, the flour, the gas, the buildings, and the workers. I thought about that for a second. Now that you put it that way, it does seem to be the case. I gave the whole project to the old chef from the food stall and told him to build the kind of place that needs no advertising. Small, plain, unfashionable, sitting at the far end of a commercial street after all the fried chicken and pizza so that people find it and feel clever. Noodles, dumplings, egg-fried rice, mutton soup, vegetable pancakes. Sell reputation in the first years, value in the middle years, and nostalgia after that. Open for 20 years, close some, keep some. That's how old brands are made. And it worked, and it still works, and it is the only part of my empire my mother has ever said she was proud of. Then Ma Chang picked up the pot, tilted his head back, and drank the soup straight out of it. Comfortable, he said, and patted his stomach. Then he stopped patting. And then we both looked down and found his hands covered in blood and dark red spreading through the pale blue stripes of his hospital gown. Because a man 1 week out from 7 stab wounds and abdominal surgery should not be playing bumper cars and inhaling noodles, and his entire incision had opened. Aren't you in pain? I was already shouting for Gao Jie. As long as I'm happy, said Ma Chang. They wheeled him back into surgery. He gave me a thumbs up on the way past with the last of his strength, like a man who regretted nothing. I got the answer out of Ma Chang, eventually, in the least dignified interview of my career. He was flat on his back after his second surgery with an oxygen mask on, and he opened negotiations at 1 million yuan per question, so I reached over and pulled out his oxygen tube. Someone surnamed Ge, you are going too far. I'll tell you. Put it back. So I put it back and learned 2 things. First, that the 20 million I supposedly owed Pan Chang Ming from an old settlement was a live legal weapon he was holding in reserve for the right moment, and that Tiancheng might genuinely lose that one in court, which I wrote down. Second, where Kong Jian's real money came from. Foreign garbage, Ma Chang said. That's what we call it in the trade. Imported waste. Used Western clothing, electronics, pianos, and instruments shipped into the southern coastal ports, picked over by first-tier dealers, trucked inland, lightly processed, and sold to fashion boutiques in Beijing and the other big cities as new product. He's a middleman, so he never touches any of it. One phone call to the factory to receive the goods, a quick process, and the new product goes north. He leaves no trace anywhere. No wonder the security bureau's been circling him. What did you expect? Did you think a man reached G-City's top 10 on daily necessities, hotels, and dance halls? Then, because he'd given away 1 million yuan of conversation for free and wanted something back, he asked whether my car accident had really been an accident. I told him it had. I told him about the newlywed driver who'd borrowed 300,000 for the truck he was going to build a life with, who hadn't run, who was preparing to sell his house to pay me, and who now worked for me along with his wife. Ma Chang couldn't raise his arm, so he gave me a thumbs up with his hand flat on the mattress. That's what I admire about you, he said. But even if it was an accident, be careful. Kong Jian's methods are darker than yours. My methods are dark? No, said Ma Chang to the ceiling, deadpan. You are a great philanthropist. That was the working arrangement, by the way. He sold me intelligence at a rate of 1 million per item, and I negotiated him down to 1 wheelchair per item, and neither of us ever paid cash. His company account, we discovered by phoning our respective banks side by side from adjacent hospital beds, held 615 yuan against my 355, making us jointly the 2 poorest billionaires in the province. That balance, by the way, 355 yuan, is real, and I need to explain it because the city's industry bureau would later spend half an hour explaining it to the mayor. Tiancheng ran on velocity, not deposits. Every yuan that landed was already poured into somebody's foundation by Thursday. On paper, 13 main companies, a dozen subsidiaries, holdings from breeding farms to a film group, total assets the auditors kept revising upward like a nervous altimeter. In the account, bus fare. When my own father demanded I repay his peace of mind loan, I showed him a 500 million contract on my phone, and he looked at it, looked at me, and offered me 50 meters of belt. Family is the one audience you can't dazzle. And Exhibit G, the one that still makes me smile, Leo. My little brother from Da Tai came to visit and left owning 2 apartment buildings, and I'm going to walk you through how, because this pitch paid my bills for 20 years. He had 30 million from the road project and no idea what money was for, so I sat him down with a pen and paper and drew him the next 2 decades. Average wages in 93, housing prices in 93, wages now, prices now, the scissors opening year by year, wages climbing by hundreds while housing climbed by thousands, WTO coming, cities filling, rents rising to meet mortgages until the tenant paid the loan for you. I listed it, I graphed it, and then, because some knowledge shouldn't circulate, I dragged the spreadsheet to the trash and burned the paper in the ashtray while he watched. Here's roughly how it went, and I want you to notice that every number I gave him was true. In 93, the average wage here was $260 a month, and housing was $100 a square meter. In 94, $360 and $200. Then the crisis, and for 4 years both crawl. By 99, the wage is $580 and housing is $700. You see it? Housing has already passed the wage, and it's accelerating away. Okay. This year, wages go to maybe 700. Housing breaks 1,000. From here, wages climb 100 a year. Housing climbs 200 or 300. Then we join the WTO, and wages jump 300, 500 a year. By 2010, the average wage is 2,500. Sounds great, right? Sounds great. By 2010, housing at Star Moon Bay is 4,500. By 2015, wages are 4,000 and housing is 6, maybe 7,000. After that, I won't even say the number out loud. Leo did the arithmetic on his face, slowly, the way you watch a man realize the floor is moving. Now, buy a unit on credit today. 200,000 borrowed, 20 years, interest discounted, 1,370 a month. In 10 years, that apartment is worth 540,000 and rents for 1,500 a month. Your tenant is paying your mortgage, and you're clearing 110,000 of pure appreciation per unit, and your payment never moves. Then I listed 20 years of wages and prices in a spreadsheet, showed him the widening gap, dragged the file to the trash, emptied it, picked up the paper I'd written the same numbers on, and set it on fire in the ashtray while he and my aspiring pop star watched it burn. Only people with great wisdom can see this pattern, I said, tapping my temple. I don't tell just anyone. I have never been more of a fraud, and never given better advice at the same time. He bought the 2 buildings. Then his grandfather's liquidated entirely. Da Tai Construction, the company, its licenses, its machinery, its 500 mu of Thai City land, traded to me for 10 buildings of future apartments and change. The 2 old foxes retired to raise birds, and somewhere in the negotiation, Leo blurted out the thing he'd carried his whole life, orphaned at 3, raised by 2 grandfathers, always suspecting he was adopted, always shouting, sole heir of Da Tai, at strangers to convince himself. I'm not adopted, he told me, deadly serious, apropos of nothing. I'm their biological child. I said, and rubbed his buzz cut, and didn't charge him for the tiger head bends I sent him home in. You can audit everything except why you like someone. Oh, and his godmother turned out to be the president of a major bank branch, which explained 20 separate financing mysteries from my past year in one sentence. The universe keeps its best jokes in escrow. Now, the system had been patient with me through all of this, feeding me workers, buildings, blueprints, shipyards, and right after the Lantern Festival, it presented the bill. The wonder. For weeks, a progress bar had been crawling along the bottom of my panel, tied to the archaeological survey my people were running on the Zhu ruins under Da Qing Mountain. That mountain kept coughing up history. The most recent find was a 3-meter bronze bull's head of Chi Yo, so large it couldn't be moved, which villagers from 10 li around were now hiking in to burn incense at. 98%. Then, one night, full. A new icon resolved. Hazy at first, then sharp. A stone gate. Not a gate, the gate. 9 arches in symmetric descent. The central span, 80 meters tall, then 60, then 30, then 20, the outermost only 10. The whole structure 110 meters high and 500 long. Carved end to end, auspicious clouds, stars and moon, dragons and phoenixes, birds, and a great many symbols I could not read and suspected I wasn't meant to. The 2 pillars flanking the central arch stood on the backs of 2 enormous stone turtles. I rotated the model for a long time. There has never been a city gate like this anywhere on Earth. If you connected walls to both ends, the walls would be 10 meters high and the gate would still be 110, which is architecturally insane and, apparently, the entire point. That's what the word means, a structure that shocks the world and becomes the landmark of its region. The system offered it free as a teaching sample. Fixed dimensions, 6 months of construction, 500 farmers, halvable to 3 by doubling the crew. Extreme construction danger, it warned. Prepare protective equipment. Train your people in wonder class and high altitude work first. Then it noticed things I'd taught it. Cement, 10 days off. Rebar, 10 days off. Steam-powered hoisting equipment, 10 more. And under all of that, the real message. Town center, next level requirement, build 10 wonders. I did the resource math and had to sit down. 1 wonder, 20 million wood, 20 million stone, 20 million iron ore. Or bypass it with special resources, purchasable at 5,000 yuan a unit, meaning roughly 1 billion yuan per wonder. 10 wonders, the first one free as a teaching sample, 9 billion yuan. The system, which I had fed ducks, wanted 9 billion yuan. And before you ask why I didn't simply mine my way out, I checked. My warehouses at that point held 2.3 million wood, 5.4 million stone, 1.95 million iron ore. The accumulated haul of demolishing half a county, quarrying a mountain, and recycling every scrapyard within reach. Enough to build entire ancient cities, which is exactly what I'd been doing with it. Against 1 wonder's 20 million per material appetite, my life's accumulated resources were a rounding error. I looked at that panel for a long time, and here's the thing. I wasn't despairing. I was itemizing. Because a man who has built his empire on scrapyard cranes and pork arbitrage doesn't see 9 billion. He sees a supply chain problem with 9 billion steps. And I already had my father, my mother, and 200 workers sitting in the resource-rich northeast, and I just accidentally acquired farmland the size of a small country. Hold that thought. We'll get there. But first, I had to invent 3 industries in 1 week, because wonders don't fund themselves. Industry 1, the claw machine. My remote control researchers had built a prototype manipulator, a metal cabinet, a glass top, 2 joysticks, a claw on rails, as step 1 toward remote-operated construction equipment. I walked into the lab, saw it, and heard cash registers from a future arcade. Have the toy factory send plush dolls. Add a coin slot. Colored lights that pulse with music. Anime wallpaper on the cabinet. Lao Hong asked what it was for. Lao Hong, a man who cannot walk past a machine without improving it, had built the world's first claw machine and thought it was a component. We sourced joysticks and buttons by buying back arcade cabinets from every game hall in 3 counties. My people may have implied a government crackdown on arcades was imminent, and the owners may have sold in a panic, and I may owe several arcade owners an apology and a franchise discount. We minted our own game tokens with Tiancheng stamped on the rim, and when Lao Hong worried about counterfeit tokens, Ace, my devoted triad researcher, designed my favorite feature in company history. Fake coins aren't rejected. Fake coins play. The claw just develops problems. It trembles. It releases early. It gets so close. A counterfeiter doesn't lose money to us once. He loses it forever, 1 heartbreak at a time, cursing his luck instead of our engineering. Ace, incidentally, solved the counterfeit problem himself, and the exchange tells you everything about my research division. Dear Godfather, he said, we were still working on that. This recognition method is outdated. I suggest letter recognition. You can do that? Now? I played a lot of arcade games. I also helped people improve coin discriminators. He said this the way other men mention a hobby. We engrave letters on the coin's outer edge. Very simple. Engrave what? Hong? I stopped. Tiancheng. Yes, boss, Tiancheng, with the shining devotion of a man receiving an order from a crime lord, which no amount of correction has ever dislodged from that young man's understanding of his employment. And then Lao Hong worried that fake coins would still work, and Ace, my beautiful, terrifying North American gift, explained my own idea back to me better than I'd conceived it. Fake coins don't get rejected. They get routed to a second board running a program that lets you play badly. The claw trembles. It grips a fraction early. It gets so close. Others play with real coins and win every time. He plays with fake coins and becomes unlucky enough to doubt his life. Brilliant, I said. Ace, I'm suddenly very fond of you. Thank you, boss. I will work hard. Lao Hong, who had just been comprehensively out-engineered by his own subordinate in front of the chairman, stood there holding a coin and looking at both of us the way a man looks at weather. Opening week at the Crescent Children's Entertainment City. 300 coins per machine per hour. 1 yuan a play. A doll dropping every 2 minutes at 2 yuan cost. 90 yuan an hour of clean profit on a machine that cost 300 to build, which meant each unit paid for itself before lunch on its first day. I sat in front of the prototype myself and lost immediately because I'd set the grip strength too honestly. Add a Titan grip routine near the doll, I told Lao Hong. Won't we lose money? Be generous now. How many people will play in the first month? Let them win. Then raise the difficulty gradually. Then bring in bigger dolls, smaller claws, keychains, pendants, different sizes, different odds. Everything else in this story I improvised. This one I remembered from 20 years of watching arcades separate people from their money with perfect, cheerful precision. The entertainment city's owner couldn't sit still for an hour. He came upstairs with soft cigarettes and a box of Wuliang Ye and put them behind my wheelchair, which is how business is done in that county, and asked whether the machines were for sale. Sell? 100 yuan an hour of profit, 10 machines, 10,000 a day. Mr. Ge, we can't calculate it that way. He scratched his head. The county's spending power is limited. It's the Lantern Festival, that's all. Even at a fifth of that, 10 machines still clear 1,000 a day. It's a plaza. Your price? 2,000 a machine, if you move your entire procurement, toys, dolls, clothing, tissues, all of it, to the Tiancheng Chamber of Commerce. He agreed before I finished the sentence, and I immediately put Dakang machinery on a production line, because scarcity pricing works until somebody reverse engineers your cabinet, at which point 2,000 becomes 1,000 becomes 300. You get 1 season to sell shovels to every prospector in China. I also converted our old construction sand-sifting machines, the rocking ones, into coin-operated children's rides with painted animals and nursery songs. Because the machines were sitting in a warehouse, the motors were already there, and every mother in China with a bored toddler is a recurring revenue stream that requires no maintenance beyond disinfectant. Industry 1.5, the car company. Which I approached the way a man approaches a cliff edge, carefully, and then not carefully enough. Ren Shen, my resident master of ancient arts and, as it turned out, mechanical engineering, had costed out building a genuinely original Chinese car. 2 billion yuan and 5 years to design around every existing patent, minus a year for every 10 additional cultivators assigned. 2.5 billion more to launch this year. At the price point the Chinese market could bear, the payback period was 10 years minimum. Not worth it. I said so. I'd stick to houses. Then, Ren Shen sent over the concept drawings for what he could build immediately. The engine was derived from a Mitsubishi sports car, layout altered, his words, so they'd like to sue us but can't provide evidence. I opened the file. A miniature van, an enlarged hatchback, a 2-seat pickup, and underneath, my own past life vocabulary coming back out of a system unit's mouth. Light, thin panels, riveted monocoque, fiber-reinforced primary parts, plastic and ceramic secondaries. 15% better fuel economy than same displacement engines, 30% more power. 2-seat microcar, 20,000 yuan cost. 5-seat hatchback, 30. 7-seat van, 25. 9-seat extended, 32. 2-sink pickup, 10. Against the cheapest car on the Chinese market at 90,000. Boss, Ren Shan wrote, clearly pleased with himself. I remembered what you said before. We are the mudslide of the automotive industry. I had said that, about a specific brand, in a different life. What are you going to call it? All our technology imitates the Japanese. To spite them, we'll name it Wu Ling, 5 ranks, which is 2 grades higher than Mitsubishi's 3. And for the badge, take the Mitsubishi diamonds and add wings. I drew it out to see what he meant. That's a 5-pointed star. Wrong placement. On the waist of the 2 lower diamonds, spreading outward. That's a ship's anchor. Exactly. Powerful and solid. And it can make Mitsubishi cry. So my automotive division was founded on a legally ambiguous engine, a badge designed to insult a specific foreign company, and a brand name chosen for the same reason by 2 men who had been summoned out of a wooden building. I approved it. Then I asked, innocently, why the garages in my developments were rent only and never for sale. Ren Shen worked the whole scheme out loud in about 15 seconds. Free parking for a year. Owners get accustomed. Street parking banned inside the community. Property management strict. Renewal inevitable. Then, rising density, rising prices, and only then do we sell the spaces. So that's why you're building cars, he said. What happened to letting every Chinese family afford a good car? You've misunderstood me, I said. If you buy from us, you get a year of free parking. Industry 2, the electric bike. BaiD sent a delegation to discuss batteries. The visit started badly. Their engineers took one look at my custom wheelchair, opened the battery case, and discovered that Lao Hong had powered it with nearly 100 loose lithium cells wired together like a bomb costume. Their exact assessment involved the phrase, highly likely to explode. I had been sitting on that battery for weeks. Lao Hong fled the meeting on foot, through a field, shouting about junior high physics, and only returned when I promised not to bungee him from a Mi-26. But the meeting itself, I hijacked entirely. They came expecting to talk about electric cars, and I opened with a lecture. Oil prices had just swung wildly. Oil only gets scarcer and dearer. China was starting to take pollution seriously, and subsidies were appearing. Electric vehicles had actually beaten combustion engines to market a century ago and lost on batteries alone. Every major manufacturer had a program running. The whole room was nodding, delighted, because a wealthy Chinese builder was clearly about to fund an electric car. Then I gave them my market data, straight-faced. China's electric vehicle production had gone from 50,000 units in 1998 to 500,000 last year. Tenfold growth. Insane growth. The delegation stared at me. Their leader stood up. Boss Ge, are you talking about electric bicycles? Yes. Not electric cars? Do you think there's a market in China for an electric car right now? Silence. Because there wasn't, not for a decade, and every engineer in that room knew it, and none of them had wanted to say it to a man with money. How good is an electric bike? I kept going. 1/8 the energy of a motorcycle, 1/12 of a car, 1/20th the space of a private vehicle. Motorcycles need registration. These don't. Half the working population can't afford a car and can't rely on a bus. And how many women ride motorcycles? None. How many would ride something light, fast, pretty, and chargeable in a kitchen? All of them. I laid out the tricycle drawings. And this one hauls fertilizer in the countryside and sells roast sweet potatoes in the city. Then, in 2 years, we take the technology to buses. We already own the buses. First, we learn to walk. Their manager asked for a moment and went outside to phone his chairman. I sketched every model myself. 3 ultralights, 3 simple models, 2 standard, 1 luxury, and then spent a night with my sister's old middle school physics textbook relearning ampere hours, watt hours, and what any of it meant, because I'd been signing off on battery specifications for weeks with the serene confidence of a man who could not read them. That's the least glamorous scene in this entire story, and the one I'd defend hardest. A man with 3.5 billion yuan in assets at 1 in the morning doing junior high homework so he couldn't be lied to by a supplier. Then my Chamber of Commerce did the thing that made it famous. Frame from the bicycle factory, shell from the plastics company, motor and controller assembled by my mechanical department, batteries flown in by BYD, from handshake to finished vehicle, 2 days. 2 days, 4 models, and the city leader himself test rode the first unit out of the factory gates grinning like a schoolboy. We priced them at $666, $1,266, $2,466, and $6,666, undercutting every comparable machine in the market by 300 yuan, and the Chambers factories, the ones Kong Jian's dumping war had tried to strangle, suddenly had a product line the whole province wanted. Total cash I invested, approximately 0. Technology as equity, materials on credit, sales through my own showrooms. The city's industry bureau later confirmed I had built a vehicle company without spending money, in a tone somewhere between admiration and filing a complaint. Industry 2.5. I cut my film division loose, and it cost me nothing and made me a fortune. Xu Haoyu came at me with a proposal I'd been circling myself. Tianyu owed Tiancheng 60 or 70 million in internal debt, money I'd spent on cameras, a film center, an art school partnership, an effects team, and as an internal division, it could never borrow a yuan of its own. So, spin it out. A holding structure with 6 subsidiaries under it. Film and television, games, media, advertising, sound, effects, toys, with its own balance sheet, its own borrowing capacity, and the claw machine business as its first profitable product line. So responsibilities are clear, he said. Coordination is mutual, promotion is mutual. Games feed the films, films feed the games. I approved it, and the accounting is worth understanding because it's the trick I used repeatedly afterward. Before, I had a cost center that owed me 70 million I'd never collect. After, I had equity worth 70 million in an independent company that could take its own loans, pay me dividends forever, and, crucially, fail without taking Tiancheng with it. Same assets, same people, same buildings. Completely different risk. Then I named my price for independence. By year's end, Tianyu buys Tiancheng 2 parcels of land, no less than 500 mu each. No problem. If you can't come up with it, I'll see you on the construction site. Silence on the line. Then, faintly, understood, boss. Industry 3, and this one I genuinely cannot take credit for, Siberia. Remember old Joe, the fur legend who took my drunken tank jokes seriously? While handling the tank paperwork in the Far East, he called me at 1 in the morning to report he'd finished the other thing I'd asked for. I had asked for nothing. He reminded me that at that same drunken dinner, I had announced I wanted to buy Siberia. Misunderstand my fitch. My in-law Joe Cheng was there. My grandson was there. They'll both testify. Why do you think a few scrapped iron lumps cost you tens of millions? When I heard your grand words, I grabbed a bottle, put on my vest, and went straight to the airport. Old Joe, how much land? 150,000 hectares, southeast corner of the Amur Plain. 10-year lease, 100 Yuan per hectare per year, no commission from me, and the Navy threw in extra and said you should come visit the big guys at the Far East port sometime. Their exact words, cheap, brother's price. I looked at Hei Mei, who was still at her desk at 1 in the morning because she'd suspected I might need someone. 150,000 hectares. How many mu? 2.25 million, she said, without reaching for a calculator, which is the entire reason that woman got signing authority. 2.25 million mu of black soil. For reference, my entire empire, every development, every mountain, every industrial park across 3 prefectures did not add up to 20,000. What are you planning to plant? Old Joe demanded. The regulations are strict. You'll need to declare seed and machinery in advance, and absolutely no pesticides, or I can't help you. What do you suggest? Potatoes or barley? What's the point of barley? You ship it home and brew alcohol with it. What are you, stupid? And that's the exact moment, 1 in the morning, 3 days into teaching myself battery chemistry, a man on the phone from Siberia calling me stupid, that the whole thing locked together in my head. Barley and sorghum. Alcohol. Pure ethanol. Not for drinking, for burning, in engines. Cheaper than gasoline in a country whose fuel prices I could remember climbing for 2 solid decades. Barley, I said, and sorghum. All of it. You'll have to send people. Where do I get people? When have I ever lacked people? Mine are already in the Northeast. Ha! I knew it. I knew you wanted to buy Siberia. It made the national news the next morning as an anonymous domestic entrepreneur's bold agricultural investment, with speculation about 500 million tons of barley arriving at Hei port and what that would do to the brewing industry. I watched the report over kanji. You're both wrong, I told the television. I'm growing it to burn. My mother called from the Northeast to ask whether the anonymous entrepreneur was anyone she knew, and once I stopped hyperventilating, the drunk version of me turned out to be a strategist. Because that land solved the wonder problem. Here's the chain. 10 wonders means 9 billion yuan in purchased resources, or an unthinkable tonnage of timber, stone, and ore. I already had 200 workers in the Northeast with my father and a spare town center sitting unused. Hei port sits on a frozen river in winter, and on the far side of that river is the largest reserve of timber and stone on the planet, most of which nobody is watching. My original plan had been to build a wooden house up there, activate base number 3, and quietly move a work crew across. Now I didn't have to be quiet about anything. I had 2.25 million mu of leased farmland, an agricultural declaration, a shipping route, and a Russian Navy that considered me family. My third town center wouldn't be smuggled anywhere. It would go across on the ice in daylight, as agricultural infrastructure, and my resource convoys would come south past the border guards I'd been tipping generously all winter. Barley for the ethanol, timber and stone for the wonders, and a supply line whose paperwork had been arranged by a drunk fur trader before I even knew I needed it. Barley and sorghum on that land meant ethanol. Ethanol meant fuel independence from gasoline prices I remembered climbing for 2 decades. And the resource convoys, timber, stone, ore, flowing from the Northeast down through Hei port meant my 9 billion yuan wonder bill had just found its quarry. My father was up there building substations. My workers were up there with a portable town center. The Russian Navy considered us family. I'd like to claim I planned it. What actually happened is that every reckless old man in my life independently overachieved in the same direction, and I invoiced it as vision. Which brings us to the two old men racing for the title of my most profitable liability. Lao Hong had turned a botched acquisition into 37,000 barrels of oil profit. Old Joe had turned a drunk joke into an agricultural empire. At the company banquet, I sat between them, listened to them argue about whose catastrophe had yielded more, and quietly moved them both to the top of the org chart, in the special category I reserve for people who must never be given precise instructions because vague ones work better. 4 more scenes from that stretch, because they're where the company's next decade got built. The first is a set of drawings. The Grand Canal CBD. 600 mu, the largest thing my company had ever attempted. 200 mu of commercial street, 400 of high-end housing, and water diverted out of the canal to run through the middle of it and join the small commodities market's U-shaped channel, so that from the air the whole district reads as the character for mountain, drawn in navigable water. I'd asked the sales office to collect suggestions from prospective buyers, and over 100 came in. Building appearance, unit layouts, what the neighborhood should have. I answered every one of them personally, by hand, over 2 evenings. That's not customer service, that's the cheapest market research in existence. And it turns 100 strangers into 100 people who tell everyone they know that the boss wrote back. Then I designed the thing, and I'll admit I enjoyed myself. The bank building as a giant X in plan, east wing leased to the bank, south wing offices, the shaded lower wing a business hotel with a view over the stadium, 28 floors, neon along every edge, a rooftop entertainment deck with a football pitch on one arm and billiards on the other, ringed by 10-meter LED screens. Chen Paper's headquarters as a T, offices in the crossbar, warehouse in the stem, connected to the market's fire road. Tiancheng Plaza as 2 5-story black glass slabs, each split into 3 blocks joined by mechanical steel sky bridges. Technology mall, brand clothing, supermarket, food court above. Children's world, sports and culture, home living, cinema. The 2 slabs linked by a suspension footbridge, so the whole silhouette reads as a dash, a peak, a dash. The residential half I split into 8 gardens named for the 4 arts and the 4 gentlemen. Qin Qi Shu Hua, Mei Lan Zhu Ju, at a plot ratio of 2.5, where the market standard was 4.5, with shared area charges capped under 5%, which cost me an enormous amount of sellable floor space, and which I did anyway, because I had lived in the future these buildings produce. The ones built at maximum density age into stairwells that smell of damp, elevators permanently under repair, and green space that exists only on the sales brochure. I had exactly 1 chance to set what a Tiancheng address means for the next 50 years, and I was not going to spend it on 11% more units. The second is the small commodities market, and specifically the afternoon I stood in front of the province's water engineers and pretended to be one. Everything else in my spring lineup was construction, and construction I know. The market was hydrology. I wanted the 12-li open sewer converted into a working canal, dug through from the Grand Canal in the east to the artificial lake at Xiang County Star Moon Bay, joined to the channel Heijie had already extended, forming a U. Both ends open to the canal, the base of the U being the lake, so 2 bodies of standing water become moving water, one arm navigable, the other running beneath the market itself. Prefabricated slabs laid in a repeating pattern of open water and covered walkway, lotus on the exposed surface, willows along the banks, bridges over piles between every block of shops. It's a beautiful drawing. It is also, as several professors gently explained, a question about anti-seepage curtain grouting at the dam base, split grouting in the dam body, phreatic lines, drainage and load reduction, and K, the one that genuinely stumped me, how you get a U-shaped channel that short to flow reliably clockwise across 4 seasons when it ties into a national water diversion route. Water surface, level surface, geoid. I had outsourced every water project of my previous career and understood roughly half of what was being said to me, so I did what I always do. I built the terrain inside the system and simulated the whole thing until it stopped failing, printed the result, then wheeled myself in front of a consulting group of civil engineering professors, water conservancy officials, and bridge specialists, and delivered their own conclusions back to them with total confidence, in the tone of a man who had derived it personally. They nodded. They took notes. One of them said the phreatic line assumption was elegant. I was still enjoying the admiring silence when my phone rang with intelligence about Ford's engineers, and I have never in my life been so grateful for an interruption.
The third is a rooftop conversation I had with my driver about a stadium. Brother Gao, my new personal driver, promoted from the security detail after the accident, an honest man being slowly, painfully educated in business by me out of the passenger seat, asked me from the front of a Jinbei van how a sports center could possibly make money when 99% of venues in China lose it. At least 100 million a year, I said. How? Have you watched the Sancha Cup? Of course. From the second season, it goes professional. 32 teams. Every business in my chamber sponsors one. Every township, county, and city sponsors one. Premier League format, knockout rounds. The television station pays $20,000 a match for live rights. The sponsors pay me advertising fees, and I cover every team expense, kit, training, travel, all free. You'd lose 10 million. Against what? A 2-minute national television advertisement costs more than this whole league, and the league runs for months with our name on every frame. Then tickets, jerseys, mascots, boards inside the stadium, shops outside it. Rookie drafts and player trades paid in points instead of money. Points that redeem against rent exemptions, shop selection, property management waivers for businesses, against football pitches, bus stops, and bus routes for townships. Brother Gao went quiet for a while. So the townships compete for infrastructure. Now you've got it. I got that idea from a basketball league I'd watched for 20 years in another life and have never once received credit for, and I'll take my compensation in the form of the Flying Saucer Gymnasium opening a full year before the Lotus Stadium, so I could test the whole model on basketball first. Which brings me to the last of them, and it's the one I actually loved. The Flying Saucer Gymnasium, my retractable roof arena, the proof of concept for the big stadium, entered its steel hoisting phase, and I spent a pre-dawn morning at the site doing the thing I actually love more than any deal, watching cranes. 4 in the morning, snow in the wind, and 8 kilowatts of iodine tungsten lamps making that valley brighter than noon. 3 tower cranes and 2 crawler cranes turning slowly around a circular building that was starting to look like something, sparks falling 40 meters through the dark with that sizzling hiss, hundreds of men moving underneath. Nobody in the command hut but the attendance board. My project chief, Lei Wang, had worked from 8 the previous morning until 2:30, so I let him sleep and pulled the shift managers instead. I've built a lot of things. That hour, in a wheelchair, in the snow, with a telescope and a thermos, and nobody talking to me, is what I'd go back for. The hoisting sequence is like assembling a pot lid the size of a village, ring by ring. And our secret weapon was a document we called the Drawing Explanation Codebook. The system-optimized assembly order, down to which bolt you tighten first. Doing it 2143 instead of 1324 is the difference between a 50-year roof and a 5mm misalignment that compounds until something falls down. That codebook was the crown jewel, split between sworn-in graduates and system men, and it's why my steel structures went up spans at costs that made competitors assume fraud. I rejigged the shifts into 4-hour rotations. No welder holds surgical focus for 8 hours, not even mine. Bought the crew's overtime at double and shaved 2 weeks off the schedule before breakfast. And I launched a singer. Lei Hua had been haunting my sales office for weeks, a struggling little starlet nursing free tea in the client lounge from 9 to 6, like she was clocking in, waiting for luck to walk past. She finally auditioned for me with a folk song, standing up in the middle of a Western restaurant to sing it. At the next table, an Italian restaurateur I'd hired was teaching table manners to 5 giggling receptionists and my 70-year-old finance director. All 6 of them were losing. I liked her hunger, so I offered her a contract with 1 clause of fine print. Sing free concerts at my construction sites and branch openings until further notice, album to follow. What I didn't specify was how many construction sites I had. My finance director asked if I felt guilty. She didn't ask, I said, and by the time she counts them, she'll be famous. Both things came true, and to this day she credits me at award shows, warmly, through visibly gritted teeth. Then someone mailed me a bullet, and the end game started.
A craft paper bag left at my front desk by a disguised young man. One worn rifle round dug out of dirt somewhere, no note. The classic message. My secretary, Hey May, reported it with a tremor in her voice. I reviewed the surveillance with a cigarette and a frown, because the courier's walk looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. I studied that footage frame by frame. Kwobu sports shoes, made by the Wang Brothers factory in Sancha Township, my chamber. Jacket, same factory. Whoever this was had dressed himself entirely in local product, which meant either a local or someone who wanted to look like one. And his walk was familiar in a way that itched. My intelligence chief traced the craft envelope to a stationery factory, then to 11 shops that stocked it, then to 7 customers who'd bought one since the new year, 3 teachers, one of my own members, 2 city officials, and 1 young man nobody could name. Then little Tao called with an answer that made my stomach drop. Boss, it's your older brother. Guo Junwei. Same week, Kong Jian's son got his legs broken with a crowbar in Xiang County by a man witnesses swore looked exactly like my older brother. For about 90 seconds, I entertained it, because my brother is genuinely unreliable, and in my previous life turned out to be a disastrous father, so a disastrous brother was well within the range of the possible. Then I did the only useful thing available, measured. Guo Junwei is 1 meter 80. The man in my lobby footage was 170 at the outside. Not my brother. Someone dressed as my brother, in my chamber's clothing, doing things designed to be blamed on my family. Wrong height, though. My intelligence department confirmed it in an hour, a look-alike, deliberately styled. Someone was manufacturing a war. Send Ge a bullet, break Kong Jian's air, sit back while the 2 biggest grudges in G City burned each other down. Kong Jian called me breathing fire, and this is the moment I'll grudgingly respect him for. We talked each other down. 2 men who had spent months dismantling each other's businesses, who had every reason to believe the worst, stayed on the phone long enough to notice that neither attack made sense. If we fight to the death, he said slowly, the G City market falls into chaos, and Jiangnan walks in unopposed. His own in-law, Pan Changming, topped his suspect list. Mine had a different name on it, because I'd heard about a new advisor in Ma Chang's camp. Picture the scene, which I reconstructed later from 3 sources. Ma Chang in an ICU bed, freshly restitched, being briefed by his assistant when someone knocks. Who is it? A muffled voice through the door. Guo Tianming's lifelong enemy. Enter a young man in a hoodie with a scruffy beard, dusty from the road, who introduces himself as Wang Fan, styled Go, Wang Fan Dog, and proceeds to lay out, unprompted, a startlingly accurate reading of the entire war. That my chamber's retail arm was deliberately weak and the retail front was a feint. That the auto trade city had been dangled to hold Kong Jian's attention while construction delivered the actual blow. That the next move would be another construction feint, followed by the auto sector finishing Kong Jian off. He'd worked all of it out from newspapers and gossip, in a factory dormitory, in the south, on his own. Then he named my weakness, capital chain, the same thing Ma Chang had spotted, and proposed the counter. Get Kong Jian and Pan Changming to tie Tian Cheng down in a land war, while Shang Pin quietly slips north into Tai City and south into Jiangzhou. Ma Chang, who had spent a year losing to me, sat there, listening to a stranger describe his own strategy better than he could, and thought, he's a talent. Where are you from? He asked. Guo Tianming's grandma's village. Ma Chang choked on his cigarette and nearly required a 3rd surgery. And that's my arch nemesis. A young man from my grandmother's village who had spent 3 years in a dormitory studying psychology, economics, marketing, financial management, and Machiavelli for the express purpose of defeating me, over a grievance I have never been able to identify, and which I suspect involved my previous body being unbearable to him at some point in middle school. Everyone should have a nemesis. Mine was self-appointed, self-taught, self-funded, and, this is the part that keeps me honest, genuinely good. The bullet, the look-alike, the manufactured war between me and Kong Jian. That was a strong opening from a man with no money and no organization. He had one flaw, and it was the same flaw as everyone else who came at me. He built a plan that required my enemies to cooperate with each other. I let the scheme die of confirmed suspicion, filed Wang Fan Dog's name under pending, and trying to the real event of the season, the Garden District land auction. 200 mu in G City's center, starting bid 100 million. Kong Jian and Pan Changming's alliance planned to take it as their beachhead. Every major boss in the city registered. and I registered too, with no intention of buying, because my Grand Canal land was better, and I'd already told Director Chen as much, which meant I attended the biggest financial event of the year purely as a social call. You should never let me attend anything purely as a social call. It started in the lobby, and I want to be precise about how a lie gets away from a man, because this one got 100 meters ahead of me before I noticed I was chasing it. Old Sao from Chen Paper opened by asking why I was still in a wheelchair. I told him I'd been startled and dislocated something, pointed at the battery pack behind me, and explained that my mechanical department had assembled it from 400 AA cells with an explosive yield comparable to 20 grenades. Every wealthy man within earshot took 2 steps back. Old Sao told me not to blow up the building. Then he asked what I was planning next, since I was apparently 100 billion in debt, and I, bored, in pain, showing off, said I intended to blast open the Himalayas, redirect the Indian Ocean monsoon to green the northwestern deserts, and use the surplus rock to fill in the strait to Taiwan. The tycoons dispersed. This is important. At that stage, they could still tell I was joking. Then Ma Chang rolled in on his matching wheelchair, and out of pure competitive instinct, I upgraded the material. Deepen the Yellow River, link East Lake to the Jinshou River Reservoir, open a waterway from Liang County to Ji Prefecture. Ma Chang asked what that had to do with him. I pointed out it would run straight through Tai City, where he'd just quietly bought 500 mu, and watched his face change. And then, because he still wasn't buying, I reached for the biggest thing in my head: high-speed rail. A train faster than the Shinkansen at a tenth the cost, running G City to G Prefecture in an hour, powered by a pure ethanol turbine my Siberian barley would fuel. It was a bluff built on a toy train and my drunk farmland. Somebody sharp objected immediately. The Shinkansen costs 300 million a kilometer. 300 kilometers is 90 billion. You're insane. And I had an answer, because I always have an answer, and that is my great professional weakness. Their costs are their geography. Tiny country, no resources, every material imported. We have everything here, 4 or 5 times cheaper before we even start, and we're doing research: standard rail, electric drive, pure ethanol traction, external combustion. If it works, rail costs drop, rolling stock drops, call it under 10 million a kilometer, 3 billion total. G City funds a share. Every city it passes funds a share. Tai City, G Prefecture, BYD. Tiancheng builds it at cost because we're the contractor, and we sell the technology and the patents on top. Then I produced Old Joe's Siberian lease as proof of the fuel supply: Chinese, Russian, and English, with the Amur seal, a naval signature, and the Ice Bear stamp, and a room full of 100 millionaires passed my farm papers hand to hand, making impressed noises. 7 billion rubles for 2 million mu of farmland to grow sorghum and barley for ethanol, I said. Does that sound like a man who's joking? Damn it, said Ma Chang slowly. The anonymous rich man from the news. That was you? And this is where I lost control of it, because a man from Wanxi Technology Group asked to invest, and I hadn't been talking to him at all. I'd been trying to needle Ma Chang. I tried to wave him off. Ma Chang and I are practically partners. It's awkward. And he said his company had ample funds and no good project, and offered to take a smaller share for more money, 50 million for 0.5%. Then somebody else offered 100 million. Old Sao, the paper magnate, gently explained to me, that although railways can't be privatized in China, a cheap new system could absolutely be sold abroad, and to any domestic city that wanted one, so ownership was beside the point. I stood there watching a room full of the sharpest businessmen in the province patiently explain my own imaginary business back to me, and thought, are you all insane? Or have I finally lied at a scale that stopped registering as lying? Ma Chang, who knew me well enough to smell a bluff, decided the funniest possible move was to loudly repeat all of it to the arriving city leadership, expecting to watch me drown. I tried to shut it down. I did. I said, "Leader, we were just bragging, don't take it seriously." And Leader Wang Zihong spread his hands and said the most dangerous sentence a powerful man can say. "I'm not taking it seriously. I just want to understand it." So I gave him the technical version, and God help me, I gave it well, because I had actually thought about this. Pure ethanol against gasoline. Lower energy per liter, higher thermal efficiency, 60% less carbon monoxide, far less unburned hydrocarbon, and, the part that mattered, a fuel I could grow instead of buy. I sketched a liquid oxygen ethanol arrangement borrowed from rocket practice. Burn ethanol to generate heat. Exchange that heat against liquid oxygen at minus 183 degrees to build pressure. Use the pressure to feed the combustion chamber. Catalyze the turbopump with peroxide. I showed him my research models, which were, and I want to be transparent here, decorative toys from a hotel display. A small plane, a small tank, a small rocket, a small train, which I introduced to the leadership of Dongshan province as the Mi-26, a simplified T-80, a liquid oxygen ethanol test article, and the target rolling stock. And leader Wang Zihong adjusted his glasses and said, "Ah, you're proposing a gas turbine hybrid drive." The room went still, and then the leader of G-City delivered, from memory, without notes, a 40-minute graduate seminar on turbine electric traction. He explained that the Soviets and the Americans had run gas turbine trains in the 60s and 70s and set a 300-kilometer-an-hour record that still stood, and that the technology had died not from failure, but from lack of computer control, which we now had. He explained that the Mi-26's turboshaft was the most power-dense aviation engine in the world for its lifting capacity, and that scaling it down made it lighter still. He explained cogeneration. A microturbine runs hot, waste heat is normally loss, but route it through a simple exchanger and it becomes cabin heating in winter and, via absorption cooling, air conditioning in summer, achieved with no electricity at all. He put typical turbine efficiency at 20 to 35% and cogeneration at 80%. He compared energy density, lithium cells at 120 to 150 watt-hours per kilogram, a centimeter-scale turbine at 5 to 700, cogeneration potentially past 1500, 10 times. Then he proposed the architecture that made me put down my pen. Don't drive the wheels with the turbine at all. Run the turbine at constant optimal power as a generator, fixed voltage, fixed current, and drive the vehicle with an electric motor. Idle on the motor, cruise on the turbine, dump the exhaust as thrust on long, straight runs. No fuel burned sitting still, no wear from stop-start. Efficiency past anything in service. Add front and rear aerodynamic surfaces, he added, and you could put this in a Formula One car and win, though you'd want a pilot rather than a driver. Somebody asked, carefully, how he knew all this. My father is an academician at the First Aviation Group. He spent his life on aerospace engines and forced me to learn all of it as a boy. He shook his head, almost wistfully. I was young and rebellious. His father was an aviation academician. My city's mayor had been raised on jet propulsion at the dinner table and had waited his entire political career for one businessman to walk into one room and hand him the excuse. He connected my fake train to my real assets like a prosecutor building a case in my favor. The Mi-26s and their turboshaft engines, the 115 Godfather researchers, the remote control lab, the battery pack that had nearly detonated me. By the time he finished, my improvised nonsense had become a coherent national technology strategy that I was apparently already executing, and he announced, in front of every wealthy man in the city, that G-City would seed the project with 200 million yuan. The tycoons stampeded. Chen Paper pledged 100 million. Wanxi Financial Technology begged for 0.5% stakes. Men I'd met an hour earlier were bidding against each other for shares in an engine that existed as a toy on my laptop. I stood in the middle of the feeding frenzy, experiencing the rarest emotion of my career, the fear of a bluff succeeding too hard. There is a specific legal term for selling shares in an imaginary project, and I was watching the city leader crowdfund me toward it with the best intentions in the world. Ma Qiang, watching this from his wheelchair, went through the fastest emotional arc of his career. He had loudly repeated my bluff to the leadership, expecting to watch me drown. He had then watched the city commit 200 million to it. And now he rolled up beside me during lunch, a 2 yuan boxed meal from my own canteen, 2 meat dishes, 1 vegetable, 2 buns, and egg drop soup, because the city was hosting and the city buys from me, while I gnawed a chicken leg. I have 100 million. How many shares? Not for sale. We're fellow patients, comrades in arms. When I retire, I'll move to Guo Village. We'll be neighbors. Heh. I'm serious. 100 million. I asked you to invest a week ago, and you told me you had nothing. Now you have money, and I don't need it. Some things, once missed, stay missed. Give me 2%. Earlier it was 20 million for 0.5%, 100 for 2. I'm the one losing out. And here I made my one genuine mistake of the day, which was to hesitate visibly and then say, with real regret, that it was a shame because a technology patent, a new energy play, and a manufacturing IPO in one instrument would have set his descendants up for life. I watched that land on him. He waved his secretary over and left to go home and lie down. 2 things saved the afternoon. First, lunch. Second, the fact that over that lunch, the city quietly ran a full inventory of what I was actually worth. And the Industry Bureau's report ran so long, the leadership had to cut it off after half an hour, 1/3 read. 13 main companies, the subsidiaries, the holdings, the aviation division, the agriculture division, the charity schools. Total assets, 3.5 billion yuan. Cash on hand, 232 yuan and 51 cents. I'm told the room was silent for a while, and then leader Wang Zihong said, "He really is going to become Ge Baiyi, Ge of the 100 billion, the nickname the city had been half joking about for a year, and the vote to invest carried unanimously. My bluff had been retroactively collateralized by my own empire. I decided, walking back in, that the ethanol turbine was now a real project, partly because the science had genuinely convinced me, and mostly because the alternative was explaining myself to a notary. Then the auction began, and descended into the single most perfectly stupid hour of the entire war. One detail about that auction I should explain, because it's the only reason I raised a paddle at all. The city priced the parcel per mu rather than as a lot. 500,000 per mu, minimum increment 50,000. Which sounds like an accounting choice and is actually psychology. 300 mu at 500,000 is 150 million, and each increment is 15 million, and no man alive raises a paddle 15 million at a time without his stomach turning over. But 50,000 is a number you can say lightly. 50, 50, 50. Bidders climb a staircase instead of jumping a cliff, and the city collects the difference. My propaganda manager asked me why they'd done it that way, and I explained it to her in the car, and then explained the thing underneath it, which is the only real secret in property development. You don't buy land. You buy buildable floor area. 300 mu is 200,000 square meters of dirt. At a plot ratio of 4.5, it's 900,000 square meters of sellable building. 200 million yuan across that is about 220 yuan a square meter of floor space. Add construction, and you're at 700 against a local selling price of 1,500. That's the whole industry. The higher the ratio, the cheaper every square meter you sell. Then why is our own ratio only 2.5, boss? Because we're not selling square meters. We're selling somewhere to live. The bidding opened at 500,000 per mu. As a courtesy, purely to warm up the room, I raised my paddle once, planning to be immediately outbid by Kong Jian and Pan Changming, who had built their whole quarter around winning this land. Nobody bid. Tiancheng, 550,000, once. I looked around. The tycoons had all just pledged their liquidity to my turbine and were sitting on their hands, smiling at me supportively. And the two men whose land this was supposed to be, the alliance, the reason for the entire auction, were missing. Both of them, gone from the hall. Twice. I want you to picture me, a man with 232 yuan and 51 cents in the bank, sitting in the back row, one uncontested paddle away from owning 200 mu of downtown G City at 165 million yuan, on land I had explicitly told the city I did not want, in a district where developing it would actively enrich my enemies. I turned left and grabbed old Cao from Chen Paper by the sleeve. Brother, bid. We have no money. The company just restructured. You know this. I turned right to the Yuan Shi director I had met 90 minutes earlier. Brother, bid. No, I want more shares in the ethanol turbine. Tiancheng, 550,000. Behind me, someone was smiling at me encouragingly. Every wealthy man in that room had spent lunch pledging his liquidity to my imaginary train and was now sitting on his hands out of what I can only describe as investor solidarity. And the two men whose auction this was, the men who had built an entire alliance around this parcel, Kong Jian and Pan Changming, were not in the building. Where are they? I hissed at my public relations manager. They went out for lunch, boss. They haven't come back. Here is where the three of them were, and I want to lay it out in order, because it's the funniest hour of my life, and I had nothing to do with any of it. Ma Qiang had left the building early. He'd come to that auction for two reasons. The stated one, keep me talking so I wouldn't notice Shangpin moving its assets to Tai City. The real one had been eating him since his ribs healed. Pan Changming had broken his leg months earlier.
The broken leg put him in a hospital. The hospital was where he met a nurse. The nurse was why he got stabbed 7 times. In his accounting, every wound he'd suffered that year traced back to his own brother-in-law. And then the Alliance had tried to make Shangpin front the money for the Chongming building and the Garden District. Everyone has a temper. Ma Chang's had been accumulating interest. So Wang Fandog, my self-appointed lifelong enemy, doing genuinely excellent work for the wrong employer, had assembled a squad of martial arts school graduates, and at lunchtime a phone call reached Pan Changming from what appeared to be his own G-City office. Your wife is here, and your daughter is pregnant again. Pan Changming, a man whose entire alliance rested on his daughter's engagement to Kong Jian's son, and who very much did not want Kong Jian learning about an accidental pregnancy, told his 2 bodyguards to wait outside and walked alone into a shuttered lamb soup restaurant across from the government compound. He even pulled the iron gate shut behind him and lowered the heavy winter door quilt, for privacy, he thought, and for soundproofing in case the family argument got loud. It got loud. Meanwhile, Kong Jian had left for his own reasons. He'd finally done the thing he'd been muttering about since the crane, hired a professional from South Vietnam. A man his loyal subordinate described as very skilled, and who had been in position since morning. And Kong Jian, a man who had spent a year losing to me in public, could not resist watching. He climbed to the highest balcony nearby to see it happen. From up there, he spotted his assassin, a middle-aged man in a military coat, squatting at the intersection south of the compound, selling bananas. Doing quite good business, actually. Then he watched Ma Chang roll out of the government compound in an electric wheelchair, wearing a winter hat, accompanied by a pretty secretary, heading north. Traitor, Kong Jian spat, and kept watching. Then the banana seller stood up. The rest I have from 4 witnesses and 1 police report. The assassin walked up behind the wheelchair, unhurried, professional, drew from inside his coat, and fired. The man in the wheelchair was Ma Chang. Same wheelchair, Xu Haoyu had built us matching ones, and Ma Chang had bought his because he liked mine. Same winter hat, he'd copied that too, off my head, in a hospital corridor because it looked warm. Same pretty secretary walking alongside. Same building he'd just left. Wrong billionaire entirely. The round hit him square in the back and launched him out of the chair, and somewhere in the air he spat blood and, by his own account, looked up and saw a figure on a distant rooftop screaming. And then he hit the pavement and did not die, because the bullet had stopped against a deformed lump of metal in the frame of the custom support belt my hospital had fitted him with, the reinforced abdominal brace prescribed after his stitches burst eating my noodles. Let me be precise about that chain because I want it appreciated. My hospital's brace. Prescribed for an injury my cooking caused, inside my design of wheelchair, under my style of hat, stopping a bullet paid for by my second enemy, aimed at me while its occupant fled the scene of assaulting my third enemy. And Kong Jian, watching his expensive professional shoot the wrong wheelchair, lost his mind on the rooftop and screamed across the rooftops of downtown G-City in front of the entire street, "Idiot assassin!" Because here is the thing about a man who has just watched a professional he personally hired shoot the wrong person from a rooftop he personally climbed. He does not think, he reacts. And his reaction, at volume, across downtown G-City, in daylight, in front of an entire street of pedestrians, was to identify himself as the person who had commissioned the shooting. Ma Qiang, face down on the pavement with a bruised spine and a mouthful of blood, rolled over, located the silhouette on the roof, and bellowed back the ancestral curse of all Dongshan. His secretary, hauling him upright, found the flattened metal lump in his brace and started making a noise that was not a word. And Ma Qiang, being Ma Qiang, told her to stop moving him because he thought his lumbar disc had been pushed in, which is not a medical condition and which he has continued to insist upon ever since. Sirens converged from every direction. Inside the hall, the auctioneer was reaching Tiancheng 550,000 when the chief secretary burst in and the leader stood up and terminated the auction, voiding all bids, including, thank every god in the registry, mine. So let me total up that afternoon, because I've never had one like it. My 3 enemies, the Triple Alliance, bound by marriage, wealth, and a shared hatred of me, had, in a single hour, beaten up their own member, shot their own member, publicly confessed to hiring an assassin from a rooftop, and handed the city police enough evidence to occupy the entire alliance's lawyers for years. I had contributed nothing.
I was inside a building, panicking about a land bid. The belt that saved Ma Chang's life was the closest I came to participating, and I'd prescribed it weeks earlier for noodle-related injuries. The leader turned to me before he left the room. G-City's entire street camera coverage was, by then, my bus network, my routes, my stops, my equipment. Tianming, lend the Security Bureau your transport surveillance. Of course, leader.
Full cooperation. I signed that authorization from the back row of a terminated auction, handing the police the footage of a shooting commissioned by one of my enemies, at the scene of a beating commissioned by another, against a third recorded on cameras I owned, on routes the city had paid me to run. Infrastructure. I told you it mattered. That night, I sat on the hospital roof, my hospital, my mountain, my glowing crescent of a city spreading east along the canal, and did the year's accounting one more time, the honest version. 12 months ago, my parents sold me for 8,800 yuan, and the buyer's daughter chased me around a meat stall with a cleaver. Today, the city's own auditors, men with no sense of humor and excellent spreadsheets, priced what I've built at 3.5 billion, and the girl with the cleaver runs my supply chain, rides shotgun on my tractor, and is legally entitled to half of it, a deal I got, all things considered, at 8,800 yuan. The chemical plant that poisoned my valley in one life never broke ground in this one. The old village chief who died at their banquet spends his evenings yelling at my workers for marching too loudly, in excellent health. My father is rebuilding his name at -35 degrees out of pure stubbornness, and I've stopped trying to talk him out of it because I know exactly whose stubbornness it is. And on the frozen river below the mountain that started all of this, 600 amateurs from every county in Dongshan were racing sleds for a pair of trophies melted down from cursed gold, while a village that used to sell donkey meat charged them for tea. And the open items, since I keep honest books. Somewhere in this city is a professional assassin who is paid for a job he hasn't finished. His employer is headed for a cell, but the man himself walked away from that intersection and hasn't been seen since, and men like that hate leaving invoices open. Somewhere in Tai City, Wang Fan Dog, my self-appointed lifelong enemy, is drawing up his next scheme with my name on it, and he's getting better each time. And behind my eyes, patient as winter, a system panel is showing me 9 empty pedestals and a bill for 9 billion yuan, while up in Siberia, on 2 million mu of frozen black soil, the convoys are already rolling south with the stone and timber to pay it. I finished the cigarette and went back inside, because the Flying Saucer's roof closes next month and I intend to be there when it does. They sold me for 8,800. Ask the auditors what I'm worth now, and then check back, because I'm nowhere near done counting.